Chapter 1438. P.S. On the 31st, there are many old Alliance Masters who have quietly joined the League. Polar Bear, Yu Xiaoyao, Jinren Xiao, Stephen T., Threezy, Yunket 2011, Brother Ho HG, Brother Da, Foot Digging Man, and so on. You're all old readers. I'm lazy this time. I won't update you one by one because I have too much debt. I can't pay it back. There are still nearly 200 chapters of debt. How do you think I can pay it back? I can only wait for the adjustment and try my best to update. As long as there is, I won't hide it. Thank you for your support. You've made my dream come true. It's enough. Let's take it slow. Thank you, everyone. If Lu Xiaoyi and Qin Xian could understand the key point, there was no reason that those old young gods couldn't understand. They also understood that in addition to strength and cooperation, the most crucial factor that could determine victory and defeat was willpower. In the previous battle, both sides couldn't talk about willpower. Everyone thought that there were still people behind them who were related and didn't owe them anything. Therefore, after a battle, the death rate was only between 10% and 20%. Most of the remaining people who were beaten out were those who were unwilling to fight to the death after being injured, so they admitted defeat and retreated. It was hard to say how many of them really couldn't hold on and how many of them took advantage of the situation to withdraw. However, this time, the people of Zhou who realized that they were at the final juncture made a change. They chose the cultivators who entered the game based on their fighting will first, and then strength. How could one measure willpower? There was no way to measure it. Therefore, there was only one requirement: either win or die. Such a requirement was very difficult for the Taoist cultivators who had always been carefree. They couldn't do it before because there weren't enough cultivators. After all, those who had the determination to fight to the death were in the minority. Now that the number of cultivators had increased, it would be a joke if they couldn't pick out 2,000 people out of tens of thousands of cultivators. Moreover, the courage to sacrifice was contagious. When this trend was established with continuous victories, there would be more and more cultivators willing to step forward bravely. No one was born brave, but it also depended on the surrounding environment. Bai Mei proposed, and the Yang gods agreed. Starting from Yang God, they no longer needed to maintain the situation for stability. Instead, they wanted to cut off 3 lives. Everyone understood the principle of starting from me. The Sun God took the lead, followed by the primordial spirit, True Lord. He wanted to form a moral public opinion that it was shameful to come out with serious injuries. This was inevitable in the war mode, and it was impossible to rely purely on one's intuition. Even someone as powerful as a 5-ring Soul Master would put an effort in this aspect. Find coercion under the influence of righteousness. Of course, there were also countless rewards. This was the blood that the masters of the 9 upper sects had to pay. They had led this realm for hundreds of thousands of years and had obtained countless benefits. It was time for them to spit out a big mouthful. Bai Mei looked at the dozens of Yang gods present with a grim expression. Everyone, the disciples have been mobilized. Now it's up to us, the old ancestors, to set an example. I won't say much. If you can't bear to part with your thousands of years of cultivation, then you don't have to fake your way up. Leave it for those who are willing. To be honest, I, Zhou Xian, have never met a Yang spirit since the beginning of the Go game. If I don't meet one, how can I set an example for the others? Out of the 9 spots, I will take one. It is my responsibility to take the initiative. Old man Xian spoke up at the right time. I'm old. I don't think I'll be able to last until the end of the era. Why should I care about a few hundred more years? Count me in. Yang spirit cultivators would not be provoked. However, as the 3 pillars of Zhou Xian, the reason why they could stand in this position for hundreds of thousands of years was because they had their own strength of character. In the first 2 games, Xiaoyao Travel and Tai Xian had suffered heavy losses. Since the 3 of them were willing to stand out now, they had to take the lead. They were not here to join in the fun. In the end, 3 Qingwei Yang gods, 2 Yuanshu Yang gods, and 2 great Buddhas of Bitter Zen came out. These people were very experienced in slaying 3 lives, and they were also more battle-hungry. They went all out. This was the style of a great cultivator. Being secretive and taking one step at a time was not the style of a young god. Zhou Xian was ready to go all out. However, Lu Xiaoyi was drinking with the slug. His friend was a little absent-minded. Although he wanted to kill the enemy, he was not selected in the selection of the sect. Because he did not have enough time to become a monarch, he was no longer as glorious as he was in Jindan. This was actually the normal trajectory of a cultivator. It was like a top student in primary school who was ordinary in high school and became ordinary in university. When countless top students gathered together, most people would become mediocre because their circle was smaller and there were more evildoers. The slug's glory was in the Aurus core realm. When he was in the nascent soul realm, he had already fallen behind everyone else. Now that he had struggled to become a monarch, he was completely ordinary. In this aspect, Hairlip was actually similar to him. It was impossible for all four friends to shine in the end. Lu Xiaoyi was very lucky to have a friend like Qin Xian who could follow him closely and not fall behind. He could not ask for too much. There was no way to comfort him. This guy had a bad temper and was stubborn. He did not listen to others. When he was with his former friends, he felt the difference and would automatically alienate himself. This was a common problem for proud people. If Lu Xiaoyi did not take the initiative to find him, this guy would still avoid meeting him. Among the four, Lu Xiaoyi was the closest to this guy in terms of temperament. Unfortunately, this was not something that others could help with. No one could. He could not persuade him, but of course, he could not discourage him. The best way to comfort such a friend was to find something for him to do and make him feel that he was still useful to his friends. It's been more than 70 years, and I haven't heard any news about the Tai fragment. Slug, your Qingwei is well informed. Help me ask around. I can't wait. The slug was confused. When did you start studying the 5 ties? What does this have to do with your sword vein? Do you want to fly out with your sword and return the universe to chaos? Lu Xiaoyi smiled proudly. It has nothing to do with the sword vein, but it has something to do with me. When I become an immortal one day, I'll overturn the universe with my sword and let everyone start anew. I'll give you the birth of an ancient beast. Do you like Shangliu or Jiuing? Slug reluctantly said, All right, I really owe you, but I haven't heard any news about it. Everyone is stuck in the bounded domain and can't go out. Where can we find the fragment? I can only help you ask, but I'm not sure. Lu Xiaoyi did not expect him to do anything. He had even asked by Mei, a young spirit, but he also did not know anything. But the slug had other ideas. Dao, when you come back, give me a copy of Heaven's Choice's coordinates. The sect is very strict in this regard and does not allow people to go there easily. I'm thinking that after this war ends, no matter what the result is, I'll go out and walk around. As a cultivator, it's not shameful to cultivate to supremacy. But if I still can't let go of my shackles and go out to see the world, then wouldn't I have wasted my life? Lu Xiaoyi was sad. He knew that this was his friend arranging a way out for him. First, it was to find opportunities, and second, it was to see the vastness of the universe. He could not refuse such a request because he was actually the same kind of person. If he was going to be like this for the rest of his life, then why not go out and walk around more? For people like them, dying on the journey and dying in a foreign land was the best ending, not dying of old age in an immortal cave. Yin Bo's last words of regret were actually about this. As a friend, other than supporting him, he had no other thoughts. Why did he have to be so wishy-washy? Chapter 1439. The cruel third round began. However, the process was different from the past. This time, as the peak of cultivators and the ancestors of all cultivators, the young spirits began to exert their strength. It was beyond the expectations of the Heaven's Choice. They had indeed changed their minds, but they had not changed too thoroughly. They had not been mentally prepared to deal with the challenge of Zhou Xian on the level of young spirit. They had thought that the winner would be decided by the cultivators below. A Qingwei young spirit showed his brilliance. He was also one of the few young spirit great cultivators in Zhou Xian whose strength was above that of Bai Mei. In his early years, he had wandered the universe bravely and fiercely. In the past few hundred years, he had returned to the sect because of the change of the Great Tao. Coincidentally, the strength of the Heaven's Choice Yang spirit he was dealing with was very ordinary, which made it convenient for him to kill him quickly. When the low-level battle had just reached its climax, the divine realm of the Yang spirit had already undergone a great change. The Qingwei Yang spirit took the lead on the premise of some luck. Then, he cleverly joined forces with Bai Mei. One cut appeared in the world, and the other cut the past and the future. Soon, he won another city. This time, the Heaven's Choice Yang spirit had to go all out. The battle of the Yang spirits instantly became a battle of life and death. Their original method was to slowly find the opponent's weaknesses and mistakes in the torment. But now it was 7 against 9, and Zhou Xian's Yang spirits were all aggressive, abandoning the previous safe strategy and becoming extremely aggressive. This forced the Heaven's Choice Yang spirits to follow suit. They could either admit defeat or go all out. Normally, in a battle between Yang spirits, one would attack and the other would defend, or one would attack and the other would defend. There was a strong sense of foresight in it, so it was very easy to stall for time. However, once both sides began to attack and cut each other's lives, the situation would become extremely dangerous. The Zhou Xian Yang spirit had long had this intention, but the Heaven's Choice Yang spirit couldn't drag it out. If it dragged on, the advantage in numbers would become more and more obvious. At that time, they might not have a chance to fight for their lives. It turned out that even if the Yang Spirit Supreme had the ability to be reborn, it could still be very fast when they really killed each other. They cut each other's lives, found the opponent's mistakes in a flash, and covered up their own weaknesses. Once the rhythm was accelerated, they would immediately distinguish the difference in ability. In the human realm, the Yuanying were in the midst of a bloody battle. The Yuanying of Zhou Xian wanted to prove their worth. They were not dispensable and could also play a role in the game of chess. The Heaven's Choice Yuanying was also carefully selected. If they succeeded, they could eventually occupy a piece of land in Zhou Xian. With such a huge reward, how could they not risk their lives? In the demonic realm, both sides were ready to attack. Black and white were confronting each other, and they were in the final stage of the battle. In the celestial realm, primordial soul stage, cultivators danced and charged, moving about freely in the chessboard. In a short period of time, close to 10 primordial soul stage cultivators had died in battle. None of the people from Zhou Xian retreated, and neither did anyone from the Heaven's Choice Taoist sect. Both sides had realized that this was a fight to the death. Thus, he gave up all his fantasies. At the very least, he wanted to drag someone down with him before he died. Just as the battle below was getting more and more intense, the clouds suddenly gathered and the game ended. The outcome of the battle between the sun gods had been decided. The chessboard of heaven and earth announced that Zhou Xian had won the battle in the upper realm. Only when everyone was ejected from the chess piece space did they realize what price the ancestors had paid for this victory. On Zhou Xian's side, Qingwei, Yuan Shi, and Bitter Zen had each lost a sun god. On the other hand, the Heaven's Choice sect had lost 6 sun gods in battle. The remaining 3 people were really unable to hold on, so they surrendered. This game of chess was also the fastest game of chess in more than 70 years. In less than 3 days, the outcome of the battle between the top forces had already been decided. Such an example immediately stimulated the bloodlust of the cultivators below. Everyone knew what a sun god supreme meant to a force. In view of the absolute advantage of the Heaven's Choice sect in terms of the sun god level, even if the exchange ratio was 1-2 in the future, the first to be wiped out would definitely be the upper realm of Zhou Xian. They were all the ancestors of the major forces, the pillars of their sections. How could they allow the exchange to continue? Therefore, there are all kinds of petitions and many persuasions, asking the ancestors not to be too crazy. The outcome of the game of chess should still be decided by the number of cultivators below. Under any circumstances, the old people used their brains, and the young people spilled their blood. This was the only rhythm of the war. The most profound meaning of this crazy battle between the sun gods was not that the sun gods should fight like this in the future, but that it fully mobilized the determination of the cultivators below to fight to the death. At this point, the understanding had finally been unified in Zhou. There was only one game, and they would never back down. It finally feels a little like a real Dao battle. In addition to being limited by the rules, the tactics are also slightly rigid. Hey, the battle in Zhou could have been dragged on steadily for 100 years without a problem, but why does it become bloody and cruel whenever you get involved? Qing Xian was very emotional. Lu Xiaoyi didn't fall for that. What does it have to do with me? It has more to do with you, okay? The first 2 dragon slayings in the demon realm were organized by you. I was just a pawn, and my role was limited. Moreover, isn't this kind of change good? At least there's still hope. Their original fighting style is like boiling a frog in warm water. In the end, they won't even have the courage to resist. Zhou should thank us for the changes we brought to them. If we didn't win the first game, I don't know how low their morale would be now. Qing Xian looked at the sky. It's clear. The Buddhists will attack next. Their way of betting on the continent can't be done by a single orthodoxy. The Buddhists will think that we've suffered heavy losses and think about how to take advantage of it. At least we don't have to be in a dilemma when choosing the participants. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. In fact, he couldn't pick out anything. The so-called restraint in the cultivation world was only relative. You couldn't say that you could defeat the Buddhists, and of course there was no such thing as Buddhists defeating Taoists. When they really fought, it was still a contest of strength. The only advantage was that there were indeed many Taoists who had relatively rich fighting experience against monks, and their cultivation methods were indeed directional. For example, among the remaining 5 upper sects, Xiaoyao Yu, who was good at spiritual power, and Yuan Sherdongzhen, who was good at mystery, were relatively weak against the Buddhists. This was because the Buddhist spiritual stability was well known in the cultivation world, and there was no way to take advantage of it. Relatively speaking, Taoists like Qingwei and Taixin, as well as Bitter Zen Temple, were the most important forces to deal with the Buddhists. Of course, this was at the lower level. When one reached the Sun Spirit level, these so-called taboos actually didn't exist. This time, the Sun Spirit suffered heavy losses. Next time, I'm afraid it will be Yuanying's turn. Why do I feel that this chess game is getting more and more intense, but I'm getting more and more relaxed? Other than killing a few in the first game, I don't even have a chance to play in the remaining 2 games? Qing Xian snorted. Of course you're free. Anyone who has a partner who plays chess will be free. I can't compare with you. I always lead people to fight at the most dangerous time in every game. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. This is called the justice of the heavenly Tao. When I was fighting desperately in the 5th ring, you were sleeping soundly in the blue sky. Why? Now that you played a few more games, you're feeling unbalanced. Chapter 1440. The 4th game. The Heaven's Choice Buddhist sect had come prepared and had made thorough preparations. They had arranged elite troops at all levels. Sensing the different positions of Zhou, they did not dare to ignore every battlefield. The Yang spirits in the divine realm were in a stalemate. The Yang spirits in Zhou had changed their strategy and were defending and counterattacking. The primordial spirits in the immortal realm were also carefully probing each other, but their current caution was not the same as before. Previously, when they encountered danger, the cultivators would withdraw from the game. Now, even if there was danger, they had to go against the risk. These were 2 different kinds of caution. Battle formations began to appear on the Yuanying battlefield. This was the common choice of both sides, because a purely hot-blooded attack would cause a lot of unnecessary losses. Now, both sides knew that the opponent would not retreat easily. It was no longer a matter of hot-bloodedness, but more of a test of technical and tactical cooperation. It was precisely because both sides had truly returned to normal that the battle was even more dangerous. There was an unconcealable killing intent in the calm. The Devil's Realm had once again become the focus of the battle between both sides. The Heaven's Choice Buddhist sect knew very well why they had failed in the previous battles. The battle between the Yang spirits was just an exception. The real key was the Yin spirits in the Devil's Realm. Kawa had one another challenge. She was also thinking about how to use Lu Xiaoyi in the most efficient way. This guy had been very idle recently. Because he had been regarded as the last trump card, he had been watching the fun leisurely. However, Kawa had a sense of crisis. If she used him like this again, would he really not be able to play the role he should have the last moment, because of the limited influence of his height? For real go, it was not necessary to determine the winner at the last moment, although it might be true in most cases. There's also a kind of victory called control. However, for the cultivation go game, because of the chess pieces themselves, the chess players might not be able to completely achieve their own strategic intentions. Of course, it was impossible to have complete control from the beginning to the end. What she could do was to ensure that her chess pieces were in a state of encirclement against the opponent during the crucial battle for the chessboard. She could maintain the advantage of numbers, and the strength of the surrounded chess pieces was suppressed by the heaven and earth chessboard. This was the way to win. In this game of Go, the opposing player had adopted a very stable way of playing Go. Connected. Almost every space of the living chess pieces was connected to each other, forming an iron wall. The advantage of doing this was that he didn't have to worry about being surrounded by his opponents, because there was no way they could surround him. However, there was also a certain flaw, which was that the efficiency of the chess pieces was not high, and a portion of the chess pieces was wasted on the links. If this kind of chess was placed in the mortal world, it would undoubtedly lose. That was because there was a rule where even the first move had to be posted. Every move was crucial and indispensable. How could you waste so many chess pieces on collusion? The only reason for doing so was to make a decisive move on one of the enemy's chess pieces while ensuring his own safety. This also meant that the Heaven's Volition Buddhist sect would place their top-notch experts in the area of the chessboard. Kawa could not guess which part of her territory her opponent wanted to attack, but she could deliberately create such a situation so that her opponent had no choice but to attack her. As long as there were enough lone chess pieces and the structure was loose enough, there was no need to worry that the opponent would not fall for it. This was a competition of wisdom. At this point, it was also a competition of the chess piece's own abilities. It had long surpassed the scope of Go. She already had an obvious advantage in the space of the chessboard, leading by more than 20 points. If this were an ordinary chess game, she would be able to win in the middle. But here, the battle had just begun. What Kawa was doing was to strengthen the other parts of the chessboard as much as possible, while ignoring the lone chess pieces that she had deliberately left behind. Under the deliberate efforts of both sides, it was equivalent to condensing the huge chessboard battlefield into 7 or 8 squares near the Tianyuan. It was almost like a clear statement. Let's have a decisive battle here. Both sides were very clear that the other side was very clear about their own thoughts. In the midst of not giving in to each other, they walked step by step toward the final decisive battle. This was the way of the Heaven's Volition Buddhist sect. They knew that the Zhou players were very good and could always make outstanding moves. Therefore, they didn't compete in the myriad of possibilities. Instead, they competed in a head-on confrontation in an open and above-board manner, handing the victory of the game to the chess pieces. In this sense, the Heaven's Volition players had achieved their goal. Kawa had also achieved her goal, because she finally didn't have to keep a trump card to deal with possible final changes. This was the end. For her, as long as she let little E out, what was there to worry about? If the two spies were both among them, the 8,000 monk army could be buried, let alone a few dozen. Both sides had achieved their goals. The next thing to compete was to see to what extent the chess pieces they had placed high hopes on could meet their expectations. Everything was carried out around this goal. The chessboard became unusually quiet and peaceful, as if two modest gentlemen were playing chess, stopping when it was appropriate and reciprocating politeness. It was also because of this clear goal that their progress here was much faster than in the other 3 battlefields. No one was stupid. They could all see that the Demon Realm battlefield played a connecting role in the entire game. In the chessboard, Lu Xiaoyi was leisurely studying his swordsmanship. This was the starting point of the chess pieces. However, the chess pieces could not be seen or sensed with one another. It was as if each of them was in an independent space. It was also good. There was no need to communicate in groups of 2 or 3, say some encouraging words, entrust each other with their last wishes, whether or not one's mother or daughter needed to be taken care of, etc. Yes, the mother was definitely gone. He believed in Kawa and Qingxian. Perhaps this was another battle that did not require blood and sweat. It was also good. He could watch others fight and sharpen his sword. However, this was destined to be an extraordinary chess game for him. It was not because of Kawa, but because an unfamiliar consciousness was transmitted to him. New disciple of Heaven's Eyes, please receive the imperial edict. Lu Xiaoyi habitually looked left and right. The consciousness became stricter. Disciple of Heaven's Eyes, Lu Xiaoyi. Lu Xiaoyi had really forgotten about this identity. Oh, I'm here. Isn't there still an observation period and a slow-down period? Giving out the task so soon, is it a benefit? Although I don't know who you are, I can't get out of Zhou Xian's heaven and earth chessboard. If I go out, I will be dismembered. I have to make it clear to you in advance. Don't blame me for not performing the task seriously. The consciousness obviously did not expect this little new disciple of Heaven's Eyes to talk so much nonsense before he gave out the task. However, after thinking about it, those who had their own beliefs were often very difficult to deal with. The only saving grace was that their ability to complete the task was not bad. When, where, and who to give out the task is decided by Heaven's Eyes. Of course, it will be considered thoroughly. When did you have to question it? I will remember this mistake. If the task is not completed, I will deal with you together. Chapter 1441. Lu Xiaoyi was also afraid that he would say too much, so he stopped talking. However, he wasn't talking nonsense just now, but was slightly testing the attitude of the Heavenly Eyes organization. Now it seemed that it wasn't too strict. If he couldn't complete the mission, he would be punished. In other words, if he completed the mission, it was okay to talk back occasionally. The voice was calm and indifferent. There's a Heaven's Choice Buddhist sect that is coveting the source of fate of Zhou Xian and wants to use external forces to enter the core of Zhou Xian to add luck to Buddhism. This kind of behavior is against the rules of the immortal court, so the Heavenly Eyes are ordered to stop it. Therefore, you don't need to leave the realm, because this mission is in the realm. It is also because you are the only disciple of the Heavenly Eyes in the realm of Zhou Xian that the mission can only be completed by you, even if you have indeed not been in the Heavenly Eyes for long. Concise and to the point. However, Lu Xiaoyi still had a lot of questions, so he was careful. Can I ask a few questions? Speak. Lu Xiaoyi asked. Isn't this mission too broad? Too vague? There is no specific person to point to. There is no precise time of occurrence. There is also no clear location of the mission. There are tens of thousands of people in the Heaven's Choice Buddhist sect. Even if I am a Zenith Heaven Golden Immortal, I may not be able to keep an eye on them. Moreover, there are young gods and primordial spirits in the chessboard battlefield, not because Lu Xiaoyi cherishes his life, but because it is the truth. You expect me to complete the mission under the eyes of 9 young gods, dozens of primordial spirits, and hundreds of Yin gods. This is a bit inappropriate, right? The voice said, there are some things I will tell you, and some I won't. This is based on your level and status in the Heavenly Eyes. What I want to remind you is that the Heavenly Eyes don't appreciate those nagging cultivators the most. They pick and choose, and they make excuses. The Heavenly Eyes have never been slandered for millions of years. This is a sign of our loyalty to the Heavenly Tao. Since this is your first mission, and it is indeed a bit complicated, I'll try my best to explain it to you. But I hope you can understand that this is the first and the last time. Lu Xiaoyi had achieved his goal. As for whether it was the last time, he would talk about it next time. Zhou Xian's predecessor was the Tao Lord of Destiny. This was not a secret in the cultivation world, which was why it had attracted the attention of countless cultivation forces. On the eve of the great change in the universe, there were many ideas. Yes, but not all of them were correct. As one's realm increased, one would naturally know these things. The core of Zhou Xian was deeply implicated. It was the core of the Tao, fusing Tao of innate Tao. It didn't allow anyone to touch it easily. Not only the cultivators of the mortal realm, but also the immortals of the immortal court. I'm not afraid to tell you the truth. In the past, there were immortals who came here to take advantage of this place. As you can imagine, they lost their immortal status forever and only had themselves to blame. The matters of the immortal court will be resolved by the immortal court. The matters of the mortal world will be handled by my heavenly eyes. You are one of them. It's just a coincidence. Lu Xiaoyi would not pester him endlessly at this time. He was very serious. It was all information. The actions of the Buddhist sect are dishonorable, but they're not the entire sect. Only a few of them belong to certain forces and individuals. It's not suitable for them to expand. The heavenly eyes set the tone for this operation. Lu Xiaoyi felt disdain in his heart. What individual force or person? If it was really an individual, how could they gather hundreds of thousands of heaven's choice cultivators to act as a cover? It was nothing more than the immortal court having the backing of the Buddhist sect. The heavenly eyes couldn't afford to offend them, so they turned big matters into small ones and small ones into nothing. The heaven and earth chessboard originated from ancient times. In fact, it was a chessboard on a blue stone. As time passed, the Tao Lord of Destiny took a fancy to this chessboard and transported it to Zhou Xian to fuse with it. Only then did the current Zhou Xian upper realm come into being. However, the blue stone was abandoned because it was originally an ordinary stone. To cultivators, it was indeed an ordinary stone. However, to the heaven and earth chessboard, it was the mother stone that had carried it for countless years. Therefore, in terms of effect, this ordinary stone had a special meaning to the heaven and earth chessboard. The Heaven's Choice Buddhist sect found this ordinary stone from somewhere, so all kinds of things happened after that. After the voice finished speaking, it began to assign specific tasks. Among the 4 realms of the heaven and earth chessboard, there were too few people in the immortal realm and immortal realm. Therefore, it was very difficult to sneak in without anyone noticing and completely avoid the eyes of the opponents and the players. Therefore, it couldn't be them. Yuan Ying in the mortal realm, because of their cultivation level, their ability to move around in the core of Zhou Xian is very limited. Sending them in would be no different from courting death. Therefore, it couldn't be them. In the devil realm, where there are only Yin spirits, the situation is very complicated. There are many people fighting against each other, so it's very difficult for the players to deliberately pay attention to the disappearance of one of the cultivators. Cultivators in the Yin spirit realm also have the ability to move around in the core of Zhou Xian. Therefore, we judge that during the most intense battle in the devil realm, the Heaven's Choice Buddha would bring the mother stone into the chessboard and take advantage of the gap to enter the core of Zhou Xian. Your task is to stop him, because the origin of destiny shouldn't be contaminated. No one can. Lu Xiaoyi still didn't ask any questions, because there were many specific operational problems. As expected, the heavenly eye's voice continued to sound. You can't tell who has the mother stone, because it's just an ordinary stone. Cultivation methods are useless against it. But what I want to say is that it's precisely because of the influence of the ordinary stone on the heaven and earth chessboard that this person is immortal in the heaven and earth chessboard, just like the sun god. You just have to find which Heaven's Choice Buddha doesn't die in the battle. Then he's the one who carries the stone. Lu Xiaoyi raised an objection, since he doesn't die. How can I stop him? The heavenly eye's voice said, I'll tell you where his weakness is later. If he loses the support of the heaven and earth chessboard, he's just an ordinary monk, because he's the one who carries Buddha's wishes. If he sacrifices himself to the origin of destiny, then the chaotic destiny of the universe will shift towards Buddhism, which is also disadvantageous to Taoism. Lu Xiaoyi was very puzzled. Since there's the mother stone, why didn't the Heaven's Choice Buddha sneak in earlier? Why did they have to do it when both sides were fighting? The heavenly eyes said, the Buddhists want both the fish and the bear's paw. They want to get the favor of destiny, but they also want to get the upper realm of Zhou Xian. In this game, this person can help the Heaven's Choice win with his immortal body, and he can also enter the core of Zhou Xian. Isn't this killing two birds with one stone? Lu Xiaoyi found a loophole. If this person doesn't die in the game, it will definitely affect the direction of the game. If I put my energy on him, where will Zhou Xian be? If it's because of the Heavenly Eyes mission, won't I be unable to help Zhou Xian? I fulfilled my promise to the Heavenly Eyes, but violated my obligation to Zhou Xian. This isn't my style. The voice hesitated for a while. You just need to find a way to complete the mission of the Heavenly Eyes. As for winning or losing the game, you don't have to worry. We'll handle it for you. Lu Xiaoyi was very curious. How can you handle it? The Heavenly Eyes snorted. The Heaven and Earth chessboard is also under the control of my spiritual treasure system. It's just that it can't control the power of the Mother Stone. It's instinctive, just like the method we taught you to kill him. In fact, it's just temporarily cutting off his connection with the Heaven and Earth chessboard. Chapter 1442. P.S. In March, I can't remember how many times fruit has tipped me. Of course, it could also be that she purposely forgot because she really couldn't afford it. It was every author's fortune to have such readers. How could Old Fallen be so lucky to receive such love and support? At the beginning of the month, several Milky Way Alliance members made Old Fallen overwhelmed. Hence, the monthly votes reached around 20,000 at the end of the month. At that time, Old Fallen didn't know that there would be double at the end of the month. He thought that since the monthly votes had reached this position, and considering the fact that under normal circumstances, he could enter the top 10 with 23,000 monthly votes. Hence, he shamelessly shouted for everyone to help him enter the top 10. After that, he knew that there would be double at the end of the month. He knew that things were bad. Under such circumstances, there would be a fierce battle at the end of the month. Everyone would feel uneasy about spending so much money. Old Fallen reached the end and had thoughts of giving up. Adding 11 chapters had also exposed his mentality. He was afraid that forcing everyone was not his intention. In the last few minutes, Fruit sent to the Milky Way Alliance again. To be safe, he sent another 3 normal alliances. This aroused the enthusiasm of the readers. In the last few minutes, he rushed from 11th to 7th. He didn't know how to express his gratitude. Even the most practical edition was not firm. This made Old Fallen ashamed. All he could say was that the quality of the book was worthy of Fruit's love. Thank you. Words couldn't express it. I remember that the cornerstone of the existence of pre-celestial spiritual treasures is impartiality. Hold the center. Will they listen to your orders? Lu Xiaoyi was a little suspicious because he didn't want Kawa's efforts to go down the drain. That voice was a little impatient. What do you mean by impartiality? Does such a thing exist in the cultivation world? Even the heavenly Tao is biased. If there is really no bias, your neighbor should be a worm. How did you get to the green sky, 5 rings? How did you get back to Zhou Xian? If the pre-celestial spiritual treasures were really holding the center, you wouldn't be able to go anywhere. This was the truth. Before Lu Xiaoyi could fully recover from the mission of Tian Mo, Kawa's battle had already begun. Qing Xian, the most important chess piece, was thrown into the battle, but there was no move. It was just a simple stick. Kawa was deliberately showing weakness to lure her opponent into a fight. But in fact, she was thinking too much. At this point in the game, how could the two sides have any other options? The two sides were entangled in a ball of chess. At this time, there were no longer any rules and attention to detail. The only thing they were fighting over was the question of who was encircling who. However, this problem was actually very complicated, because you have me in you, and I have you in me. The chess pieces near Tianyuan were thrown into the battle one after another. You were encircling someone, and you were also being encircled. The question of how to balance and how much combat power to suppress was probably only known by the Heaven and Earth chessboard. Lu Xiaoyi was the last breakpoint. He threw himself into the eye of death, and then he was brought into the battle of chess. This was Kawa's mentality. Anyway, no matter who won this game, there was a gap of almost 40 points between the top and bottom. No one could make up for it. In the battle of almost 70 chess pieces, the number of people on both sides were similar, and the situation was similar. It was a competition of ability, and there were no tricks. Entering the battle space of the chessboard was not a random entry, but a whole team of chess pieces. Of course, how to play and move after entering was the cultivator's own business. The space was not big. To avoid stalling for time, it became a game of searching for people. Before entering the chessboard, the 200 spirits appointed dozens of battlefield commanders, which was helpful for coordination during the battle. Lu Xiaoyi and Qing Xian both had the highest command. This was due to their achievements and reputation. No one could say anything about it. Return to the team. In this kind of situation, we still need to cooperate. Lu Xiaoyi's decision was very moderate. This was not his character. If not for that damned Heavenly Eyes mission, he would have led people to kill their way out. But now he couldn't just care about his own happiness. He still needed to find the undying monk with the stone among the monks. This required him to participate in the team battle and carefully distinguish between the groups. This damned Heavenly Eyes system. He had long noticed that there was a big secret in the core of Zhou Xian. He went there with the slug before he became a nascent soul. After that, he was entangled with countless things and forgot about this place. Now that he mentioned it again, he was in a different mood. He actually didn't dislike the Heavenly Eyes mission too much. When he returned to Qing Kong from Zhou Xian, he vaguely felt that Taiposhi wanted to pull him into the Heavenly Eyes. So when he returned to the Fifth Ring, he asked a few elders in Xianyuan about this, such as Lu Feng and Guandu. In fact, they weren't familiar with the Heavenly Eyes because they didn't have any contact with it. But one thing was certain. The Crow ancestor seemed to have joined this organization before, so he didn't have any psychological burden and didn't have to worry about doing something against his will. This was also the reason why he pretended to dawdle and finally agreed to the giant tree's invitation. Like this mission, overall, it was in line with the Heavenly Eyes rules. The origin of destiny was hidden here, and it might be very important. It shouldn't be dug out to affect future generations. Instead, it should be made naturally with the changes of the era. This was also something that Taoists had always insisted on. Let nature take its course, and not take a bite out of it just because they knew there was something good here. Obviously, Buddhism didn't have such a mentality. Their general attitude was that this thing was destined to be with them. There must be some other way. Perhaps it wasn't something that could be obtained by just one person. Bearing Buddha's wish? This was very thought-provoking. He didn't believe that this was just the Buddha's wish of a monk in the mortal world. Could a Buddha's wish in the mortal world shake the origin of destiny? Then, thinking further, to be able to bring this thing to the core of Zhou Xian and really achieve something from the core, the thing behind this was very thought-provoking. This was cheating. It was very likely that some senior monk of the immortal court cheated through a monk in the mortal world. This was much better than coming down personally. Standing in the teeth of the storm and carrying out such a mission was a challenge for him. It was very likely that he was being used as a knife. But after 1,000 years of cultivation, he understood a principle. Why could he be the knife and not someone else? Don't underestimate being a knife. At least it proved that you had the strength to be a knife. There are countless cultivators in the great Zhou immortal world, and they only found you, Lu Xiaoyi. This might be to be used as a knife, but in the process, there is also a chance and good fortune. Cowardly people would be timid because of this, afraid that they would become a thorn in the side of the entire Buddhist sect. But brave people saw a rare opportunity in this. In layman's words, riches and honor were found in danger. Even the heavenly Tao wouldn't be able to see you if you still blended into the crowd after becoming a perfected sovereign. He wasn't worried about his sect. The Fifth Ring was already fighting with the Buddhist sect to such an extent. Could it be that he still wanted to mediate? Of course, he could do whatever he wanted. Therefore, he really took this mission seriously. This was the reason why he changed his personality and obediently moved closer to the main group. When he wanted to be obedient, someone didn't want to let him do as he wished. His small team only had 3 people. In fact, when placed on the chessboard, they were like 3 chess pieces connected together. On the opposite side, there were also 2 monks flying towards the main battlefield. They were probably very confident in themselves. After seeing the three of them, they directly crashed into them. "Senior Brother Liu, should we fight or—" A Qing Weiyin legend had just asked when Liu Xiaoyi's flying sword had already shot out. At the same time, he had already moved to another place. The remaining two Taoists thought that this senior brother Liu had a bad temper. When they were about to follow him, the space in front of them was already filled by the Sword River, and they were nowhere to be seen. The next moment, the Sword River retreated. Only two balls of Tao vanishing celestial phenomenon reverberated in the air. Liu Xiaoyi shook his head. "You dare to block my way with such ability? Are you two idiots?" He somewhat understood. Even in the main battle group, it was very difficult to distinguish such a monk. As long as the monk hid, he definitely wouldn't be able to see through it. Why should he passively look for him? Wouldn't it be better to let the monk come to him? As long as he was strong enough and killed indiscriminately, this monk who originally had the intention of helping the Buddhist sect win would definitely take the initiative to find him. This was the reason why he used all his strength to kill the two monks. He wanted to let the other party see his threat. To get rid of him, was there anything more suitable than sending an undying monk? Chapter 1443. The space was not big. Liu Xiaoyi and the other two quickly found Qing Xian's main force. Both of their divine senses collided and instantly communicated. "Liu Xiaoyi, you take charge, I'll do it." "Qing Xian, isn't it time for a change?" "Next time, but not this time. This time, I'm involved in something else. If you lose sight of me, don't panic. Just stay calm." Liu Xiaoyi had to tell him in advance, even if he could not be too clear. This was not an ordinary scene. It was of great importance. The task of the heavenly eyes was related to the destiny of the entire universe. Even if there was a slight deviation, it would cause the destiny of a large number of cultivators in the human world. In this sense, it was more important than a single world or region, even if it was as big as Zhou Xian. He did not want to give up on any of them, so he had to answer to Qing Xian. "Your organization. Don't worry about my situation. The core is to establish an advantage as soon as possible. Don't worry about casualties." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Qing Xian took a deep breath. This was not part of his plan. Under normal circumstances, with him and the swordsman in charge, this game would not be lost. As long as the strategy was right, there would not be too many casualties. However, he trusted his companion's intuition more, especially some inexplicable intuition. This grandson must not have told him everything, but there must be some special reason for him to risk his own safety to establish an advantage quickly. The swordsman was unreliable. It meant that the more ordinary things were, the more unreliable they were. However, the more important things were, the calmer this person was. "If you want to hurry up, I have to do it too. Don't worry. I'll use the most radical method to make you die here. Don't worry about your senior sister. I'll take care of her." Both sides' formations were not fully formed. There were still scattered chess pieces coming from all directions. It was not in line with the cultivator's habits to start a fight now. However, since the plan had been decided, there was nothing to worry about. In this aspect, Qing Xian's willingness to gamble was not lower than Liu Xiaoyi's. With a leap, Liu Xiaoyi had already cut into the formation of the monks. The Sword River circled around his body as he charged forward with a sudden assault. His goal was very clear. He wanted to break up the formation that the monks had yet to form. Behind them, Qing Xian led her men and followed up. They formed groups of several people and attacked freely. They only targeted those monks who were scattered by the impact. Their attacking methods were also extremely fierce. They didn't care about their own safety and only wanted to kill the enemy. The other Zhoxian cultivators didn't quite understand the reason behind this. But since the two leaders did this, there must be a reason. It should be because the other battlefields weren't going well, right? There were more than 20 monks, but not all of them had arrived. They were all the most outstanding eminent monks in the Heaven's Volition Buddhist sect. He could deal with one or two of them, but it was impossible for him to deal with over 20 of them at the same time. Thankfully, his objective was only to drive them away and not to kill them directly. The reason why he did this was because he felt uneasy in his heart. When it came to battles, he had never placed his hopes on others, not even the heaven's eyes. It was impossible for an inexplicable voice to make him submit willingly and trust him completely. This was not suspicion, but caution. If he could help Zhou Xian secure victory, then why would he place his hopes on the heaven's eyes to instruct the heaven and earth chessboard to cheat? Before competing with the immortal monk, he had to establish his advantage. This was the reason why he didn't care about anything and frantically stirred up the situation on the battlefield. He and Qing Xian were both experts at killing people in chaos. This change in Zhou Xian immediately caused the monks to have no choice but to follow suit. The situation on the battlefield immediately became chaotic. Lu Xiaoyi took advantage of the situation and started a massacre. He didn't even bother to observe who was dying. If that monk didn't die, he would eventually meet him. Wherever he met him, he would just meet him. Before that, it was the right way to deal with people first. In the arrangement of the Heaven's Eyes mission, there were still some things that he couldn't see clearly. Just in case, he didn't hesitate to do more in the early stages. After coming to Zhou Xian, this was the first time he was going to fight in his full state. Even when he went all out, he still didn't look for monks who were relatively difficult to deal with and unfamiliar with Buddhism. To kill such monks, he needed to probe them in the early stages. He didn't have the time. He would kill monks whose martial arts were in the direction of merit, because it was easiest for him to break through the defense of such opponents. He could achieve the greatest effect in the shortest time possible. As for the remaining monks, it didn't make much of a difference to Taoists whether they cultivated merit or not. Qing Xian had always been ensuring his safety. Although he said that it didn't matter, the two of them had known each other for 700 years and were already very close. How could he let his friend be in danger? With him and another monk, ascetic Zen, who was purposely brought along as a backup, Lu Xiaoyi was able to unleash his full strength. The swordsman went all out and attacked without any hesitation. In terms of killing speed, it was much faster than other orthodoxies. In just a short moment, more than half of the 30 monks were killed. Most of them were killed by Lu Xiaoyi. However, he still hadn't met the immortal monk. The remaining monks finally seized the opportunity and huddled together. There were 16 of them in total, but there were 27 Taoists surrounding them. Lu Xiaoyi's hard work had finally established an advantage. If Qing Xian still couldn't grasp such an advantage, then there was no need to say anything else. He could feel that there was still a monk wandering outside the battle formation from afar. It seemed like he was late, but he knew that wasn't the case. There were a total of 34 Taoists who entered the battle. 2 of them died in the battle just now, which meant that there were still 5 Taoists who were supposed to return. The space wasn't big, so it was impossible for them to get lost. If they hadn't returned yet, it could only mean that they would never return. As for why they couldn't return, other than the monk wandering outside alone, there was no other possibility. He and Lu Xiaoyi had chosen the same strategy. The only difference was that this monk relied on his lonesome to kill, while Lu Xiaoyi chose to believe in the strength of a team. At least in terms of efficiency, Lu Xiaoyi was slightly better. Seeing Lu Xiaoyi flying toward the figure, Qing Xian warned, "Be careful. That monk is strange." Before Lu Xiaoyi disappeared, he left behind a sentence. "I'll go and meet him. I'll leave the rest to you. Not only this round, but also the next round. Become the hero of Zhou Xian, young man." Qing Xian's gaze was distant. He knew that Lu Xiaoyi must be hiding something from him. The origin of this monk was probably not as simple as just being strong. What was it? This damn guy was habitually passing the buck again. As for the future, he was confident. As long as they won this round, all the pressure would be thrown to Heaven's choice. Not only would their best batch of people lose the qualification of fight, but they would also face an even more serious discord. 27 against 16, there was no reason for them to lose. However, could that strange monk bring trouble to the swordsman? Did he disappear or perish together? It was definitely not the latter. Because they had known each other for 700 years, he didn't think that this guy would perish together with anyone. He cleared his mind and began to focus on the current situation. Since the opportunity had come, he would do his best to deal with it. Chapter 1444. Lu Xiaoyi was no longer in a hurry, because Zhou Xian's advantage in the demon realm battlefield had already been established. This was a monk with a sorrowful expression. His back was a little hunched, as if he was carrying a mountain. To a cultivator, such a physical defect was almost impossible. Therefore, he might really be carrying a mountain, an invisible mountain. He looked at Lu Xiaoyi, just like how Lu Xiaoyi looked at him. He knew how dangerous this swordsman was. Even if he couldn't die here, he wasn't as fast as the swordsman in terms of killing. Therefore, if this stalemate continued, even if he didn't die in the end, he would be left alone and his secret would be completely exposed. His name was Ming Wei, and he had come here with two goals. One of them was already a little difficult now, and he could activate the other at any time. However, before he activated it, he wanted to see if he could still achieve the first goal. This didn't depend on his defense, but on his attack. If he killed this swordsman, the Heaven's Volition sect would still have a chance in the demon realm. He clasped his palms together and chanted, "Let me become Buddha. While I'm walking, if there's a ferocious thing stained with blood, I'll use Buddha's will to contain it, feel it, transform it, and replace it with my body." He pointed at Lu Xiaoyi. "Benefactor, you have a sword pellet in your heart, and you've killed 2,900 creatures. Why don't you kill me?" Buddha made 48 vows, and the boundless world shook in 6 different ways. Deities scattered flowers in the void, and heavenly music fluttered. Thus, one became Buddha. Ming Hui cultivated Buddha's will, and he had an indescribable blessing. His will to self-cultivation was incomparably pure, and it had other wonderful uses in battle. For example, this wish to stop killing was used perfectly here. He replaced the killing with his body, but he still couldn't die here. This was the so-called self-deception of Buddha's will. However, he was also a capable person. He could see the number of creatures Lu Xiaoyi had killed through Buddha's will and use it to fulfill his wish. 2,900 lines, covering every stage of Lu Xiaoyi's cultivation, including demonic beasts, void beasts, insects, winged men, and so on. Even things that Lu Xiaoyi himself could not remember clearly. He had calculated them all. Lu Xiaoyi only felt that something was bothering him. If he really killed the monk with his sword, he would fulfill the condition of stopping his killing wish. The monk could be reborn because of the chessboard, but the flying sword would be transformed by the Buddha's will. Of course, it was a process to reform his flying sword. Whether it could succeed or not depended on the confrontation on the mysterious level, but he would not use this method to fight. With a leap, he appeared at the back of the battle formation. Amidst the intense battle between the two sides, he found a monk who was in a precarious situation. With a slash of his sword, he immediately finished him off. His body swayed back to Ming Hui's front, and he shouted, "You are wrong. It was another 2,900. If we add you in, we'll have 2 more." With a shout, sword light gushed out. To stop his killing wish, there must be a vision as the foundation. Ming Hui's foundation was the fact that this vicious person had killed 2,900 lives. But this vicious person was really vicious and perverted. In the blink of an eye, he killed another one. Therefore, the foundation was not right, so naturally, he would be willing to destroy it. It was also a solution that belonged to people who killed. Ming Hui sighed. "Let me obtain Buddha." The bodhisattva of the country, in front of all the Buddhas, reveals his virtue, the tool of all the desires and desires of all the people. If he is not satisfied, he will not attain enlightenment. This was the wish to protect himself. He was talking about the Bodhi heart. The Bodhi heart was the foundation of all Dharma, also known as the root of goodness. The deeper the root of goodness, the greater the divine power of the bodhisattva. This kind of defense was a kind of conceptual conversion. You send your flying sword, I talk about my Bodhi heart. I don't care how powerful your flying sword is. I only protect how sincere my Bodhi heart is. With the same scale of immortals, how much of an immortal's flying sword has reached? How much of a Buddha's Bodhi heart has reached? If my Bodhi heart is closer to the Buddha, then your flying sword will be ineffective to turn the might of a physical sword into a confrontation of their respective attainments. The power of Buddhist vision was indeed miraculous. It left one gasping in amazement. In comparison, it was clear that Lu Xiaoyi was much further away from the level of a sword immortal. Therefore, the sword could not reach him, returning without any results. This was the difference between the real and the virtual realm. For the flying sword to be real, one needed to practice step by step. Buddha's wish was the virtual realm. A mortal monk with wisdom could also reach a very high state of thought. Therefore, using such a method to compare, who would lose? Even without the augmentation of the heaven and earth chessboard, this monk was very powerful. But even if Lu Xiaoyi's sword could not injure him, he still had other methods. In an instant, he closed in and punched down with a fist the size of a sandbag. Such a punch was something that a country bumpkin would do, a mortal warrior would do, a cultivator would do, and even an immortal would do the same. Then, he wanted to see how this monk's proportional defense could withstand his pair of iron fists. Those who played with visions were bound to have a weak body. Those who had a strong body and bloodline were bound to have strong perception. There was no exception. Minghui looked at his approach expressionlessly. There was no other way. He was also a decisive person. Otherwise, he would not have been sent by Buddhism to carry out such a mission. The Buddha's wish he cultivated was not Amitabha's 48 wishes. If that was the case, could it be that he could reach the end and replace Amitabha with his body? It was just that he belonged to the Buddha's wish lineage and could bear the Buddha's wish of other senior monks. Heaven's Choice Buddhism had tens of thousands of great virtues. Only he could bear the Buddha's wish that came from an unspeakable place. It was only because of his special origin, Bhikkhu Laoshi. Bhikkhu Laoshi was an arhat. Bhikkhu Laoshi was a karma position, while arhat was a karma position. Regardless of whether a monk was male or female, they were bound by the precepts. Because of precepts, they were bound to be fixed. Because of fixed, they were bound to wisdom. With wisdom, they would cut off the worries of the three realms and no longer fall into the cycle of life and death of the three realms. They would become arhats. Although they were arhats, their appearance was still that of a bhikkhu. Therefore, they were called Bhikkhu Laoshi. What kind of person was the happiest? It must be a person who had no worries. A person who had the slightest bit of worry would not be truly happy. Therefore, the happiest person was none other than Bhikkhu Laoshi. They truly had no worries. It was precisely because they had no worries that they had no miscellaneous wishes. Therefore, they could bear the Buddha's wish of a higher level of great virtue and use their mortal body to carry out the wish of a certain orthodoxy of a certain court. From this perspective, he was one of a kind. The heaven and earth chessboard origin stone was very precious, but what was even more precious was him as a person. Heaven's Choice Buddhism had dragged on until now to carry out such a plan. Rather than saying that they were waiting for the origin stone, it was more accurate to say that they were waiting for a person who could bear the Buddha's wish. From this point of view, his second objective was much more important than his first objective. Minghui had already realized that it would be very difficult for him to complete the first mission, which was to kill this abnormally powerful swordsman on the chessboard, and then use his own efforts to help Heaven's Choice Buddhism gain an advantage in the demonic realm. He could no longer do it. Since he could not kill him, then he could only do what he could: bring him away. The swordsman punched his body, but Minghui did not dodge or block. He allowed the meridians in his body to explode. At the moment when he was about to die, he grabbed the swordsman's fist with one hand and threw out the origin stone of the heaven and earth chessboard origin stone with the other hand. With a flash of light, the two of them disappeared. Chapter 1445. Qing Xian had been paying attention to his friend's battle. He could feel that the monk was difficult to deal with, but he was not worried about the swordsman. He knew that the monk was even more difficult to deal with. It was leaving, not dying. Even when the monk was hit by a punch, there was no sign of Dao disappearing. Then, where did he go? Was he in a space inside the chessboard or outside the chessboard? That damned swordsman did not say a word. He was truly an irresponsible person. No matter what, he could only focus on the present and hope that the rules of the heaven and earth chessboard would not change because of this. Zhou Xian was in a good situation now, but could not afford too much trouble. Lu Xiaoyi felt his body being involuntarily brought into a passage that he could not control at all. In the blink of an eye, he returned to normal, but the place where he appeared was not on the chessboard, but in a place that seemed familiar to him. Zhou Xian's core was divided into 4 layers. The outermost layer was the Earth's halo, the Earth's crust, the Earth's pulp, and the Earth's core. Before he became a nascent soul, he almost died in the Earth's pulp. Of course, at that time, he was only a small gene Dan. His current position was in the Earth's core, the place where he fell into the abyss last time. This time, he was still falling in. What made him sigh the most was that he was accompanied by a monk. It was just that he changed from Bindu Bodhisattva to the current Minghui Buddha. I'm fated with Buddha, Lu Xiaoyi sighed in his heart. In the Earth's pulp, he could not use his mana. The more he struggled, the deeper he would sink into it. The best way to deal with it was to let nature take its course. He could relax and adapt to the fluctuation of fate energy here. Then he could think of a way to get out of this dangerous place. Golden core cultivators would definitely die if they came here. Nascent soul cultivators would be better off, but it would depend on how they reacted at the time. Monarchs were much better because they had a new understanding of the Tao state. They could use their Yin spirit to travel. This was a new ability. The travel of the Yin spirit could help the cultivator's body to a certain extent, especially in a place that was familiar to Lu Xiaoyi. He could leave now, but he could not do so, because Minghui Buddha was walking fearlessly in front of them. Let's assume that I have attained the Buddha, and there is a limit to the light. If the light does not shine on 100 billion, then the people of the Buddha kingdom will not attain enlightenment. As soon as he entered the earth pulp, Minghui gave birth to the bright wish. There are 2 kinds of Buddha's bright wish. One is the wisdom light, which illuminates the Dharma realm. The other was Changguang. Every Buddha was different. Changguang was the light emitted by the Nirmanakaya Buddha. It could be seen with the naked eye. It was also known as body light or round light. The light that he was emitting now was normal. Under the illumination of the light, he moved forward resolutely, as if he had never considered the issue of safety after entering the earth pulp. To be able to advance in the earth pulp, this courage was worthy of affirmation. How could a person chosen by the Heaven's Choice Buddhist sect be someone who cherished their own body? However, what Lu Xiaoyi was curious about was whether the monk would continue to move forward after reaching the core of the planet. How do I get in? His mission seemed to have failed. He didn't kill the monk immediately. The problem was that he wanted to try it with his own ability, but he did not expect the monk to be so resolute. In his 1,000 years of cultivation, it was rare for him to procrastinate like this. The abnormality this time was actually some kind of speculation and suspicion toward the Heavenly Eyes mission. If he had directly laid his cards on the table with the monk and killed him according to the method taught by the Heavenly Eyes, with the sharpness of his flying sword, the probability of success would be very high. However, he had only completed a mission. The only advantage was that the Heavenly Eyes would not punish him for his mistake. However, if he had delayed, the mission might have failed. However, he really wanted to see what would happen if he failed. Minghui Buddha had pulled him into the core of the planet to fight for a chance of survival for the Heaven's Choice Buddhist sect in the chessboard of heaven and earth. At least without this terrifying swordsman, there would be a chance for them to turn the tables. However, this was the first time he had come into contact with the swordsman. With this person's combat experience, how could his fist be caught when he threw out a punch? He had done it on purpose, because Lu Xiaoyi did not want to obediently kill him on the chessboard. Instead, he wanted to kill him in the core of the planet. Punishment by the Heavenly Eyes? He did not care. He wanted to know the truth about the fate origin at the core of the planet. If Minghui did not pull him away immediately, he would continue to be entangled with him. Lu Xiaoyi had his own understanding of fate. The principle was that he had to be bold and not be afraid of getting into trouble. Therefore, it was not that he did not want to complete the mission, but he wanted to complete it in his own way. Following behind the monk, he did not attack, nor was he able to attack. Once he used his flying sword, he would be in trouble. This was the restriction of the special environment. Even if he was a monarch, he could not avoid it. Minghui ignored the swordsman behind him, just like how Lu Xiaoyi ignored the monk in front of him. The two of them rushed forward tacitly, as if they were not enemies, but companions. The earth pulp was the thickest part of the entire core of the planet. The two of them were not fast, so there was still a long way to go. Lu Xiaoyi was not sure what he wanted to know. He was only acting based on his intuition. He could not make a move in the earth pulp. Forcefully making a move might put himself in danger. He set a limit for himself. Before reaching the core of the planet, he had to make a decision, no matter what the decision was. The biggest doubt was, did the fate origin really exist? If the fate origin existed, then where was the morality origin? It couldn't be biased, right? If the fate origin was really here, could it be easily influenced? Even if it collapsed and there was no one controlling it, it was still one of the 5 golden immortals among the 36 Khanate Daos. Who could influence it? Human cultivators could not. Could the deities of the immortal court? Not necessarily, right? If Buddhism had the ability to influence the fate of the great Tao, why would it be suppressed by Taoism for millions of years? Therefore, he really wanted to see this historical moment. If there was no such thing, then someone was lying. Who could it be? Curiosity killed the cat. Humans understood this logic, but cats might not understand it. Lu Xiaoyi had been with Little Meow for a long time, and he had also been infected by some of Little Meow's bad habits. For example, he wanted to get to the bottom of it, even if his current realm was not suitable for him to know too many secrets. No matter how slow it was, there would be a day when it would happen. Lu Xiaoyi had already thrown the heaven and earth chessboard to the back of his mind. He suddenly felt that such a Tao battle was meaningless. Moreover, before he left, he had already laid down the foundation for Zhou Xian. If they still could not win, then there was no saving them. As for the next chess game, many of the elites of Heaven's Choice Taoism and Buddhism had already been defeated. Even if they were to gather again, they might not be able to match their current strength. Therefore, there was nothing to worry about. He even felt that what he did in the core of Zhou Xian might have a greater impact on Heaven's Choice Buddhism than the chess game. This was a feeling. It was also a cultivator's instinct. Chapter 1446. The people of Zhou Xian no longer needed any encouragement because their morale was already at its limit. They had won again. They had already won 4 games in a row in the 5th game of Mount Tianwang of the 9 boards. This was different from the 3 games of 10,000 Buddhas, because they were now dealing with the true elites of Heaven's Choice. No one would not believe that this was their bottom line. Defending the 5th game to the death had become the consensus of the people of Zhou Xian. With such a consensus, there was no shortage of enthusiastic people, because they were making history. Xiaoyi, actually nothing happened. He just disappeared. Disappearing and dying are 2 different things. The most important thing is that he knew about it in advance. He also told me before, but it was unclear. This guy has a big secret. He is not only a Zhou Xian spy, but also a 5th Circle spy, a human spy. If one day people tell me that Lu Xiaoyi's original body is a worm, I won't be surprised at all. Qing Xin purposely found a chance to comfort Jiahua. In fact, even he did not know the real relationship between this couple. It was weird, and he could not explain it clearly. As long as it was related to this guy, it seemed like there was no normal person. He had never thought that he was actually abnormal in the eyes of others. Jiahua sighed. Qing Xin, you don't have to worry about me. I'm already used to it. I'm not used to it if he doesn't cause trouble. I've been waiting for him to cause trouble. Now that it has finally happened, I'm relieved." He frowned and said, "As long as the lantern is still on, there's no problem. But I'm not worried about him, but the next game. Are we going to be in danger?" Qing Xian smiled. "You don't see it clearly enough. Actually, whether it's Xiaoyi or I, we're deliberately trying to reduce our presence. In the Battle of Zhou, if the people of Zhou are willing to go all out, there will be no problem. The key is the mentality. Zhou momentum is already at its peak. Not to mention the fact that little E is missing. Even if the two of us aren't here, it won't be a problem to block it. But you have to believe in yourselves first. Believe in Zhou, not two Fifth Circle spies. In the end, we're just passers-by, guest Taoists. We can't stay in Zhou forever. There will be a day when we will leave." Kawa did not have the time to be sad. She understood what Qing Xian meant. "Thank you, I understand. Whether it is the chess piece or me, the player, our confidence is the key to success or failure. But don't deliberately downplay yourself. Without the two of you, the rebellious spirit of Zhou wouldn't have been awakened so quickly. By the time they truly wake up, I'm afraid it will be too late." Qing Xian nodded. "That's right. If he continued to persevere, he wouldn't be able to win more than 2 rounds. There would definitely be changes in Heaven's choice. With a team like theirs, nothing can be seen when everything is going well, but once there are changes in the middle, they will immediately fall apart. Let's just wait and see. It won't be too far away." The people of Zhou were actively preparing for the next game amidst the victorious atmosphere. After Xiaoyao Mountain won 5 rounds in a row, not only did their confidence soar, but the key point was that a large number of experienced chess pieces emerged from within, gathering elite troops to gamble on a game. Although there was a possibility that they would be wiped out, there was also a possibility that they would become stronger and more experienced as the game went on. This was the difference between veterans and new recruits. They also played an irreplaceable role in the process of battle. Among them, a large number of leaders had emerged. They dared to fight and were good at fighting. They knew how to end a favorable situation and how to persist in an adverse situation. When these people took up the majority of the chessboard, their influence on the overall strength of the chessboard was far-reaching. As for Heaven's choice, up until now, every group of people gathered was basically a newcomer to the game. Even if they had the strength, even if they had a thorough plan, a plan was a plan, and it was completely different from actual combat. Under this situation, the scales of victory and defeat were quietly tilting. They were not the only ones who were aware of this point. Outside the sky of Zhou, in the Taoist camp, the cultivators stacked on top of each other and cultivated in the void. It was a spectacular sight. This was already more than 70 years after they came out of Zhou, but from the way they were organized, it was no different from when they first arrived 70 years ago. This was the difference between the cultivator army and the mortal army. They had more endurance, and everyone knew what they were doing, instead of fighting for the emperor in the mortal world. On a large treasure ship at the core of the camp, dozens of Taoist young gods were drinking tea and chatting. It seemed that there was no pessimism caused by the failure at all. A Taoist laughed. This time, Buddhism really went in high spirits and returned in disappointment. They thought that they could take advantage of us after our failure. Now, it's just as shameful, even more shameful. All the Taoists smiled without saying a word. Their current state of mind could be described in one sentence. It was really more comfortable than occupying Zhou. At this point, the camp looked united but was divided at heart. It existed in name only. This was the current situation of the cultivator war. His heart was sour, but he couldn't show it on the outside. He was too unsophisticated and superficial. He could only smile casually. He drank a few more cups of tea and smoked a few more cigarettes. Speaking of which, who invented this thing? It was really a perfect match for cultivators. A cup of tea, a cigarette, and a trivial matter for a long time. In the lingering smoke, both of them became illusory. A voice faintly said, "The next round will still be the Taoists. May I ask, senior brother, how should we deal with it?" Taoist Pang's voice was ethereal. "It's fine to deal with it normally. Just like the first time we came to Zhou Xian, we came from the same root. So why are we so anxious to fight each other? Tell the disciples below to stop at a certain point and not think too much about winning or losing. Taking down Zhou Xian may not be a victory, and returning in defeat may not be a loss. All the Taoists understood tacitly, and no one doubted it anymore. They were all experienced and knew very well the meaning behind Taoist Pang's words. Why should they ask more? The morale of the people of Zhou Xian was at its peak. From a tactical point of view, it was not suitable to fight head-on. Instead, they should drag it out. As the saying goes, one can't hold one's breath for long. Whether or not they would launch a general attack in the future, it was the best choice to first stabilize the rhythm and slow down. The purpose of the expedition to Zhou Xian had been partially achieved. Just like the Buddhists of the main world, no matter how arrogant the Heaven's Chosen were, they had never thought of taking control of the entire cultivation world of the main world in one battle. They were too naive. This was destined to be a long Taoist struggle, and the end was the change of the era. There were still thousands of years left. In this process, the most important thing was how to preserve their strength to the greatest extent in the struggle. By the way, after the big game began, they could see the real positions of all sides. For example, this time, they had tested that the butt of the Heaven's Chosen primordial fierce beast was crooked. This was the second reason. It was difficult to maintain the gap between the Heaven's Chosen Taoists and Buddhists. If you fought with Zhou Xian here, how could you know what your comrades on the side were thinking? It was always necessary to leave some strength for protection, just in case. This was the third reason. With these three reasons, they were destined to be a bystander in the next few chess games. In the Taoist struggle, there had never been a situation where one battle was won. Chapter 1447. The Heaven's Volition Buddhist sect's camp was similarly calm. Although they were a little disappointed, it was an exaggeration to say that they were gloomy. In the end, most of the monks who participated in the chess battle were kicked out of the game and not killed. The difference was too big. A few core great Buddhas were talking when one of them sighed. Minghui didn't do anything. That five-ring swordsman is unbeatable at the same level. Fortunately, he was taken away by Minghui and his fate is unknown. Then, will the Taoists take advantage of him in the next round? A Buddhist snorted. They won't take advantage of him. Zhou Xian's morale is at its peak. It doesn't matter if that swordsman is there or not. Those cow-noses are smart. Monk Howda made the final decision. The Taoists made a good choice. We have to do the same. Just send some people to train. Leave the core combat power behind and wait for changes. The Buddhists of the main world have retreated and explained the reason to us. At this time, the worst thing to do is to overexert yourself. It's just a storm. We have to stop and take a look. There's no rush. Let's wait for Ming Hui's news. Then we'll decide on our next move. How to calm himself down. No one knew Ming Hui's move better than him. It was like looking at flowers in the fog. Even he, the leader of the Heaven's Volition Buddhist sect, didn't understand it completely. This move was arranged by the higher-ups, but what was the specific purpose? Even he, including Ming Hui, didn't understand it completely. Therefore, his only choice was to wait and see. Liu Xiaoyi, he finally saw the legendary Earth Core. After passing through here, even with his strength as a perfected lord, his understanding of fate, and his familiarity with the environment, he felt more and more pressure. He could also feel the difficulty of the monk in front of him. The Buddha's light was not omnipotent. In the cultivation world, there were countless strange techniques. The key was who was using them. This monk's strength was very strong, but he was not stronger than him. How could he be so calm? He was just forcing himself. The origin of fate was just an excuse. If there was such a thing as the fate origin, then there would also be the Tao origin, five elements origin, time origin, space origin, and the other 36 innate Tao origin. Whoever obtained the Tao origin would be able to fuse the Tao. Cultivation had become a form of happiness, and in the end, the luckiest ones would become Tao-fusing cultivators. That was impossible. The origin mentioned by Tian Mao referred to an innate Tao that had already been fused with by someone. When the fused Tao gave up on this innate Tao, it could also be said that after the Tao collapsed, the fused Tao was the place where the fused Tao attained Tao. Fate itself did not have an origin. It existed everywhere in the universe. However, Tao integration stage cultivators had their own essence. It could be a place, an object, or an illusory concept. Due to the millions of years of Tao fusing experience, there was an unbreakable connection between the Tao fusing practitioners and the innate Taos. Even if the connection was broken, it would still affect the operation of the innate Taos to a certain extent, and it would gradually weaken over time. The place where the Tao integration stage cultivators attained Tao was the core of Zhou. As for the upper realm of Zhou, it was just a change made by the fused practitioners to the place where they attained Tao. Therefore, in the cultivation world, such a place was called the Tao origin. In fact, it didn't really live up to the name, because if the next fused Tao integration stage cultivator appeared, the Tao origin would naturally change. However, the process was too long ago, so the cultivators in the mortal world didn't have to distinguish it too clearly. In any case, a human could only encounter such a thing once in their lifetime, and they still had to be lucky. Performing Buddhist wishes in such a place, and hoping that the Tao origin of fate, or a trace of the Tao integration stage cultivator's remnant Tao, would accept such a Buddhist wish, and then spread such sentiments across the universe. Such a complicated operation was naturally not something Liu Xiaoyi could understand. He didn't understand the mechanism, the process, or the effects. He was just here to watch the show. Of course, Tian Mao spoke so seriously that he couldn't help but believe it. 80 to 90%, and the remaining 10 to 20% were purely due to his habitual questioning of authority. Questioning was a good habit. It could allow humans to keep improving, and it could prevent individuals from falling into traps. Because in the conversation between the Fifth Ring and Guandu, he learned a very interesting piece of information. The person behind Tian Mao was not one person, but many. There was Lord Lingbao. There was also a human genuine immortal. There was also a primordial beast god. Then, since this was a balanced system of checks and balances, could there be only one human genuine immortal? If there was only one, which orthodoxy did he represent? Buddhism or Tao? Based on his understanding of human nature, it was more likely that one Tao and one Buddha were involved. This was the origin of his doubts. Who on earth issued this mission from Tian Mao? He didn't have any channels to obtain information, so he could only judge by himself. It shouldn't have anything to do with Lord Lingbao and primordial beast god. They had no reason to be involved in the trivial affairs of human beings, especially when it was related to the greatest orthodoxy of human beings, the struggle between Tao and Buddhism. It could only be a human genuine immortal. Simply speaking, the nature of the mission to destroy the plans of Buddhism was of course from Taoism. But he still had some doubts because the whole mission was confusing. He just had to wait and see. He didn't have any good ideas now. Psychologically speaking, he thought that the possibility of his mission failing was very high, but he couldn't rule out the possibility of getting a chance to complete the mission in the process. He didn't mean to not complete the mission. He just wanted to see more clearly in the process. It should be said that it was inevitable, but also accidental. Monk Minghui stood in front of the core and began to perform Buddha's vow. Let me obtain Buddha. The hungry ghosts and beasts of hell don't attain enlightenment. Let me obtain Buddha. The celestial beings in the country have different shapes and sizes. There are ugly people who don't attain enlightenment. Let me obtain Buddha. The sentient beings in the world develop the Bodhi heart, cultivate merits and virtues, and make a vow to give birth to a country. At the end of my life, I pretended not to be surrounded by the masses, but I discovered the former and didn't attain enlightenment. Let me obtain Buddha. The sentient beings in the universe have no distinction between each other, and each have their own thoughts and views. Buddha doesn't disturb Tao, and Tao doesn't invade Buddha, and each ascend to the top. There are righteous people who believe in Buddha, and those who oppose him don't attain enlightenment. Lu Xiaoyi's heart skipped a beat when he heard it. That's interesting. He understood very well that the Buddha's vow that the monk spoke of wasn't his own. It was too big, too deep, and too vague. It wasn't something that Ming Hui could control with his current realm. Since it wasn't his, it must be the person who asked him to come here to express his intention to the origin of destiny, in order to obtain the recognition of the remnant Tao essence of the fated person. The person's realm will be very high, very high. With the foundation of a human immortal, how could a person who dared to frankly and promise in front of the origin of destiny that in the future Buddhism would stop spreading its teachings everywhere have a low realm? In the mortal world, even if it was a great Buddha, if he dared to say such a thing, he would immediately become the target of public criticism of Buddhism. He would become a traitor, a disgraceful person. This great vow was a little too big. It was so big that he no longer insisted that Buddhism was the only thing in the universe. Chapter 1448. Monk Ming Hui stood outside the core, displaying his Buddhist wish in front of him. He seemed to be in a trance and absent-minded. This was a situation that only happened when he displayed something that was not within the scope of his abilities. His current state was actually that of a puppet, a mouthpiece that was expressing thoughts that were not his thoughts. This was the best time to make a move. He did not even need a flying sword. He only needed a finger and a punch after getting close. However, Lu Xiaoyi stood straight, not far away, not moving at all. Heaven had its heavenly Tao, Buddha had its Buddhist rules, and Tao had its Tao rules. He, Lu Xiaoyi, also had his own Tao of ants. He never predetermined whether it was good or bad, regardless of race or orthodoxy. If you could give a way out to those who disagreed with you, then you were a good race and orthodoxy. If Buddhism was not so aggressive in spreading and excluded those who disagreed with it, then Buddhism would also be a good orthodoxy. Why not? If the person who made the wish, yes, it might be this immortal, really had such thoughts, no matter where his starting point was, once he made the wish, it could not be changed. To change it was to deny oneself. It was to dig one's own grave. Then, why didn't he believe it? Lu Xiaoyi believed that he was a person who believed in the process. Even if a great demon who ate people without spitting out their bones did good deeds for an unspeakable purpose, he would still be willing to respect him as a saint. It was that simple. It was better than those who had a great purpose but did things that angered the heavens and people, right? Amit Ba had made 48 wishes to become a Buddha. He wanted to hear how many wishes this Buddhist monk could make, or how many wishes could monk Ming Hui transfer to him. As the Buddha's wish continued, it was obvious that some mysterious existence in the depths of the earth's core had accepted such a great wish. Perhaps it did not reject it. Such a change was very magical, and Lu Xiaoyi could not understand it. What was the so-called origin of fate? Was it the remnants of fate itself? Or was it the remnant thoughts of a Tao fusing expert? Or was it both? In his previous test, he could not enter the core of the core. Even for someone who was proficient in fate like him, if he wanted to enter and come out safely, the Sun Spirit was a threshold. But now, because his Buddhist wish had been recognized, Monk Ming Hui began to slowly float in. It was as if an old grandfather was saying to his grandson, "Come closer so that I can hear you clearly." Ming Hui was still in a daze. This was the result of bearing the heavenly immortal's vision, even though his cultivation level was not high. When the vision was projected, he naturally became distracted until the vision ended. Therefore, his current behavior was actually uncontrollable. It was a kind of subconscious behavior. Even if there was hell in front of him, he would still float forward under the unseen attraction. However, Lu Xiaoyi did not want to follow him forward. The man had vision to protect him, but he had nothing. At this point, the mission seemed destined to fail. His original intention was not to interfere with a normal exchange of Buddha's wishes. Everyone had their own demands, whether they were Buddhists or Taoists. Which side to lean towards should be their own destiny, rather than killing the other party to block the expression of Buddhism's vision. Everyone has the right to speak. Every orthodoxy had one. You can't treat the great Tao of destiny as an old fool who believes in only one thing. Do you think you can stop all of this through violence? Can you stop it? If you succeed this time, what about the next time? In order to achieve your goal, do you have to send an army of cultivators to be stationed here? In the mission description of Heaven's Eye, there was no specific description of how Buddhism could affect the origin of destiny. However, the meaning behind the words was vaguely pointing to some kind of evil and dishonorable method. But in reality, they were only here to express their vision. In Liu Xiaoyi's opinion, Buddhism had such a right. This was the reason why he had been staying beside Ming Hui, but had not made a move. In the game of chess, each had their own orthodoxy. Here, one had to rely on one's own heart. The only thing that he could not let go of was that the Buddha's wish was not over yet. If Ming Hui continued to walk in, would his Buddha's wish be so modest and peaceful? Could it be that the Buddha's wish was just a prelude? The purpose was to enter the Earth's core and then use some other method? Was it to seek his own death and continue to observe? Or was it to save his own skin and admit that the mission had failed? He did not hesitate to choose the latter. Failure is the mother of success. The mother comes before the son, so there should be no problem in failing first and then succeeding, right? Before leaving, there was one more thing to do. That was to move half of his but into the Earth's core and complete a purely technical test. This was also a good habit of his. He did not take risks but strolled at the edge of the danger zone. At least he could feel the pressure in the Earth's core and know what was going on. If one day he was thrown in again, he would not be at a loss. After the test, he would leave and do more practical things, such as helping the people of Zhou to guard the Earth's core. I'm just strolling. I'm not going in. With this thought in mind, Liu Xiaoyi first reached a hand into the Earth's core. Immediately, he felt something different. It was not a huge force that pulled him in by force, but a hint of information faintly revealed in the fluctuation of fate energy. It was not as ferocious as he felt outside at all. Instead, it seemed to be a kind of friendly invitation. What was going on? Liu Xiaoyi carefully identified and confirmed his feeling. That's right, the pressure he felt in the Earth's core was different from the pressure he felt in the Earth's core. If it was really the origin of fate that wanted to invite him, he would be able to feel it in any of the 4 levels of the Earth's core, right? As long as he was in the upper realm of Zhou. Did he need to have a certain amount of courage first? In an instant, he made a decision. Follow in. He was not a person who was used to giving up halfway. If possible, he hoped that he could do it perfectly. He hoped that there would be a process that could make him feel at ease, whether the mission was a success or failure. His body slowly slid into the Earth's core. It was as if he had entered heavy water and was exceptionally sticky. What surprised him was that he felt more free here compared to when he was in the Earth's core. He still followed behind the monk quietly and listened to his Buddhist wishes. He was still merciful, and there was no place that was out of bounds. Until he reached the depths of the Earth's core, there was no way to go. Liu Xiaoyi could clearly feel the pressure around him as heavy as the stars. If it was not for that trace of kindness supporting him, with his realm, he would have been crushed into nothingness in no time. Fate was like a mountain. It was also at this moment that Ming Hui's Buddhist wishes were finally completed. From the beginning to the end, the 47 Buddhist wishes were copies of Amitabha. Only one was missing and one was changed. However, even with Liu Xiaoyi's relatively rich knowledge of Buddhism, he could not be sure which wish was missing from the 48 wishes of Amitabha. Which wish was changed? There were no flowers scattered and no Sanskrit chanting. There was only silence. In the silence, Monk Ming Hui slowly walked over. Chapter 1449. Ming Hui shook his head and sobered up from the chaos. He immediately understood where he was, but he did not dare to move. He was not a true Buddha, but only a name for the cultivation realm. He could be called a Buddha in front of other cultivators, but in front of the remnant will of a Tao fusing cultivator, he was not even a small bhikkhu. He was the same as Liu Xiaoyi, 2 ants. After venting the Buddhist vow of the virtuous senior monk in his mind, he finally returned to himself. But at the same time, he also returned to being small and insignificant, losing the ability to move freely in the earth's core. Or was it courage? But this monk was indeed magnanimous. He was born a bhikkhu, but his heart was not troubled at all. Amitabha had once made a vow that the happiness in his heart would be like a bhikkhu. He was a person like this. He quickly forgot about his own inappropriateness because he saw a person beside him who shouldn't have been there. Benefactor Lu, why did you come here as well? I'm here to fulfill Buddha's vow. But what are you here for? Lu Xiaoyi coughed lightly. He had already confirmed the process. This monk did not have any other intentions other than to perform Buddha's vow, because his current ability did not affect the origin of fate. Without the Buddhist vow of the virtuous senior monk, he was just an ordinary little Buddha in the Yin spirit realm. The only thing they needed to think about now was how to escape. You can come here, so why can't I? In this cultivation realm, is there a place that Buddha can go that Tao can't? By the way, do you know me? Minghui smiled. Lu Xiaoyi, 5th ring, Xianyuan swordsman, who, in the cultivation realm of the universe, does not know him. When we enter the chess game, all of us were warned to be careful of this person. I am Minghui. Benefactor Lu, did you follow me here to kill me? Lu Xiaoyi did not hide it. That's my intention, but this place is not easy to kill. Wait until we find a safe place, then we will fight to the death. Minghui was not scared by his empty words. When I was outside the Earth's core, you had the chance to kill me. Why didn't they kill him? Would swordsmen be so sentimental when it came to killing people? Especially the infamous Xianyuan, Lu Xiaoyi? Lu Xiaoyi said righteously, you didn't do anything bad, so why should I kill you? It's not like we're all on a chessboard. Minghui began to understand what was going on. In fact, when he fought with the swordsman, he felt that something was off. Instead of being decisive, he seemed to be indecisive. Indecisiveness was fatal to a swordsman. But in this case, this swordsman was even more extraordinary. There were some things that he only understood after he had completely unloaded his Buddha's vow, and he didn't mind sharing them. After all, the swordsman had shown him kindness by not killing him. Even if he really did kill him, it would have been worse. Hence, he said bluntly, I don't know who sent you, but do you think that killing me would be good or bad for Taoism? Lu Xiaoyi remained silent. Minghui continued, since you don't say anything, I'm afraid that you have some guesses in your heart. There is no distinction between Taoism and Buddhism in destiny. But if you really expose the fact that Taoism respects the other schools of thought on the surface, but excludes dissidents in secret, I'm afraid that it would be beneficial to Buddhism. So, if you kill me, you'll complete your mission, but you'll make a big mistake. If you don't kill me, you won't complete your mission, but you'll leave behind an endless legacy. Do you understand what I'm saying? Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. I don't understand. I never thought that small characters like us would affect the direction of the battle between Taoism and Buddhism. Master, you overestimate me and overestimate yourself. Minghui didn't say anything because he had achieved his goal. Next, he had to think about how to leave this place. Death was the way for him to leave this place. Others only knew that he was immortal in the chessboard because he had the mother's corpse. The chessboard of heaven and earth would always allow him to be reborn. This kind of rebirth wasn't a true rebirth, but it was a rebirth that allowed the user to bear the power of the attacks he received and then reconstruct another version of himself in the chessboard. However, what others didn't know was that since he was in the upper realm of Zhou Xian, he was also within the perception of the chessboard of heaven and earth. He still had a chance to be reborn, and he would still be reborn in the chessboard of heaven and earth. Then, he would be kicked out of the chessboard and returned to outer space. It would be a perfect experience. The most satisfying thing was that the swordsman could only watch from the side as he completed his mission. There was one thing that the swordsman was right about. In view of their level, they just had to be themselves. Everything else shouldn't be within their scope of consideration. He could faintly feel that this journey to the core of Zhou Xian wasn't all about the chessboard of heaven and earth. It was related to the swordsman as well. Although he didn't know what he should do, he could still say something that sounded right, but was actually wrong. Let me become a Buddha. Buddha is also Tao, and Tao is also Buddha. All living things are equal. Why should I choose? As he spoke, he revealed his golden body and calmly waited for his death. He looked at Lu Xiaoyi with great interest. He wanted to see the swordsman's final confusion. His final wish was a thought that came from his perception before his death. It came out of nowhere, and it wasn't offensive. Its only purpose was the chessboard of heaven and earth didn't do anything to him. This was his own decision. Carrying the Buddhist thought of the eminent monk still had some side effects on him, so he might as well borrow the power of the chessboard of heaven and earth to start new. Just as his Buddhist power began to dissipate and his life began to slide irreversibly towards death, Lu Xiaoyi softly uttered a strange sentence. The chessboard of heaven and earth. The rules of heaven and earth. Muyahu, why aren't you waking up? Mingwei was a little confused. He didn't understand what the swordsman meant by that sentence. He only felt a little uneasy in his heart. However, this uneasiness quickly spread. He had been reborn once in the chessboard of heaven and earth to get used to the feeling of being reborn. However, this rebirth didn't seem right. There wasn't another restart point for life, and there wasn't any spatial transfer of life force. It was just a path towards death. The chessboard of heaven and earth didn't respond. He looked at the swordsman. The swordsman was also looking at him quietly. I didn't kill you in the chessboard because I was curious. I didn't kill you in the earth pulp because you were doing what you should do. I'm killing you now because you're no longer pure. You want to push me into the heart demon realm? You're thinking too much. Woodfix is the nickname of the chessboard of heaven and earth. I awakened it just to let it know who I am. My impartial instinct. What other Buddhist wishes do you have? Why don't you use this last chance to tell me? Mingwei was running out of time. He couldn't understand why the swordsman would still kill him when he knew that there was no point in killing him. He would never know because he didn't understand the swordsman. Chapter 1450. He had an inner demon. It was normal for a cultivator to have an inner demon. It could be light or heavy, early or late. In some cases, it would pass without them noticing and fade away as they adjusted their cultivation direction. In some cases, it could be serious enough to destroy one's cultivation path and heart. Lu Xiaoyi's 1,000 years of cultivation could be said to be smooth sailing. Along the way, he had encountered many dangers, but he had never messed up his direction. He always knew what to do at the right time, which made his cultivation uninterrupted. But now, he finally felt that there was a problem with him. His inner demon had actually started at the Qing Kong exile grounds. It started from when he imagined himself as the savior of the Five Rings. Slowly, bit by bit, it sprouted and slowly changed his mentality. He was still a qualified swordsman, but this was only for ordinary people. If he wanted to carve out his own path, his current situation was actually very unsuitable. Saving the universe, saving the Five Rings, saving the sword vein, leading the army alone, going to the rescue alone, rebelling against Zhou Xian. He did a lot, but he also lost a lot. What he lost was not something tangible, but the impact was even greater. He was deviating from the nature of a swordsman. Swordsmen should be lonely, and simple. This was the cornerstone of their strength. Everything was done with the sword. But now, he was used to piling up a group of friends to do the talking. He was used to all kinds of calculations and strategies. He was used to scheming. It was shown in all kinds of hesitation, guesses, and doubts during the mission of the heavenly eyes. This should not be the attitude of a swordsman, although in reality, he did not make a big mistake this time. If he continued like this, sooner or later, he would make a mistake that he could not undo. He had too much contact with people, but too little contact with nature. This was the root of the problem. In Zhou Xian, he and Qing Xian had already vaguely felt that something was wrong, so the two of them started to keep a low profile. But this was not enough. This was the reason why Mingwei thought that he had found an opportunity. That was why he said those words at the end to make him doubt heavenly eyes, doubt the battle between Taoism and Buddhism. In the end, He even made a Buddhist vow that was neither painful nor itchy. It was not for the purpose of killing, but to confuse people's minds. This was like drawing legs on a snake. Fortunately, Lu Xiaoyi still maintained the agility of a swordsman. He decisively killed the enemy and cut off his own path of retreat. Minghui should also be from heaven's eyes. Murder, severing thoughts. As for the reaction of the heavenly eyes, there was no need to consider it. The problem now was how to get out of here. He had done all of this in the remnant will of the Tao of destiny. If the remnant will of the Tao of destiny really existed, how would they treat him? Forget it. A swordsman shouldn't have thought so much. He began to slowly retreat. He was prepared to be crushed to pieces at any time. He did not hope that the so-called Grandpa Fate would enlighten him. He did not need anyone to guide him. In fact, after he had reconstructed his body through the small universe, there was no one else who could guide him on this path. This was a narrow escape. This was because he had staged a massacre between Taoism and Buddhism in the remnant will of the Tao of destiny. Moreover, it was a massacre without much reason. For such a remnant will, as long as it slightly changed its likes and dislikes, he would be crushed to pieces under the powerful pressure of the Earth's core. In order to get rid of his inner demon, he had to kill Minghui. Minghui might not be the instigator, but he had to make his stand clear. However, if he made his stand clear, he might offend the remnant will of the Tao of destiny. Therefore, he did not avoid this. This was the most difficult retreat Lu Xiaoyi had ever made in his life. This was because he was facing an unprecedentedly powerful existence. He did not even know where the other party was. He only knew that in front of such an existence, he was not even an ant. However, he had to do this if he wanted to get out of his encirclement. Lu Xiaoyi was retreating with difficulty. However, he did not know that in heaven's eyes, there was a battle that revolved around him that he did not know. The true Buddha of Buddhism. Mission failed. You should be punished. He was the one who sent Lu Xiaoyi's mission. Don't be surprised why the true Buddha of Tian Mo wanted to stop his true Buddha from performing his true Buddha's Buddhist vow. Just based on the Buddhist vow of the fusion of Taoism and Buddhism, there would be great resistance in traditional Buddhism. More Buddhist Vedanta were against this. Therefore, it was natural for him to send a Taoist swordsman to stop the scum of his Buddhist sect. The true immortal of Taoism. You should be punished for killing your comrades. He was the one who sent Minghui's mission to disrupt the internal affairs of Buddhism. No fortress could be so strong that it could not be destroyed from the inside. Logically speaking, the swordsman's method should be very suitable for him, allowing Minghui to complete his Buddha's wish before making a move. However, the problem was that this swordsman's orthodoxy made him feel uneasy. Therefore, he did not mind giving a warning within the rules. Heaven's eyes had 4 hosts. 2 were humans, 1 was a spiritual treasure, and 1 was an immemorial divine beast. The rules should be followed by all 4 of them. In most cases, spiritual treasures and immemorial divine beasts would not participate in the internal strife of humans unless it involved their own clans. Therefore, their decision was basically the final one. However, they still had to ask for the opinions of their comrades out of courtesy. In his impression, the spiritual treasure and divine beast would only reply with a grunt and a grunt, indicating that they understood and could do whatever they wanted. However, this time, for the first time, Lord Spiritual Treasure had a reaction. Objection. You big shots are despicable. Yet you want to blame the Heaven's Eyes disciples below you? What is the right thing for him to do? You're not satisfied no matter what he does, just because you did not achieve your desired goal. The universe has changed greatly. The heavenly Tao has collapsed. Morality has fallen, and the rules have been corrupted. Heaven's Eyes is the only eye of righteousness, but the rules of 1,000,000 years have been trampled on by you all. In the long run, what is the point of Heaven's Eyes? Let's just break up. The immemorial beast god was even more direct. Objection. This child is fated with my immemorial clan. Whoever vents their personal anger on him is making things difficult for the beast god. Lord spiritual treasure and the immemorial beast god's objection was beyond the expectations of the two human true immortals. It was a clear-cut objection that left no room for discussion. At their level, speaking in such a direct tone meant that their attitude was firm. 2 against 2 was just a draw. However, when it came to the two human true immortals, they had to give in, because spiritual treasure and spiritual treasure had not affected their decisions for many years and had never interfered with their handling of human affairs. This was their face. They had given you face for millions of years. Now that they had opened their mouths, how could they not return the favor? The true Buddha smiled. Since the two of you insist, this Buddha takes back my opinion. The true immortal sneered. We are all on the same side. If the two of you had said so earlier, why do we have to make things difficult for him? Making us estranged? Chapter 1451. Lu Xiaoyi was still retreating. It took him a day to enter, and now he had retreated for 2 hours. Although he was still far from the earth pulp, he knew that the most dangerous time had passed. The fate's source hadn't changed its attitude yet, which meant that it wouldn't change its attitude. He could still feel the kindness that surrounded him, just like when he had entered the room. This was also something that he had always been baffled by. Why was he so fortunate to receive such kindness in this place? Ming Wei was able to enter the core because he had the Buddha's wish to open the way. What did he have? At most, he could only borrow some light. Now it seemed that he wasn't able to enter because of the monk's Buddha's light, but because of his own good fortune. A place that was inexplicably dangerous for the sun god was like walking on flat ground for him. It was too strange. He was already used to it. The Heaven's Eyes mission this time allowed him to come into contact with a level that he didn't even dare to think about before. He really didn't know what he was thinking at that time, trying to take advantage of the situation and pass off the fish eyes as pearls. Was this a level he could casually step into, just based on his strength? These brothers? It was too ridiculous. With a decision in his heart, he relaxed and no longer cared about the possible punishment from the heavenly eyes or any other responsibilities. He was already shouldering too much. He had carried Xianyuan, Xiaoyao, Qingkong, and now Zhou Xian. Would he have to carry the entire universe in the future? F***CK, his grandpa, do whatever he wants. Would Zhou Xian fall without him? Not necessarily. Even if Lu Xiaoyi and Qing Xian didn't stand up for him, there would still be others who would stand up for them. For example, the leader of the revolution, Bai Mei Xian, or the outstanding talents who emerged from the various battlefields on the chessboard. There was Yuanying, perfected cultivators, and those leaders from the small sects of Little Lu. There were many talents in the universe, each leading the way for hundreds of years. This wasn't Lu Xiaoyi's era, but everyone's era. The 36 innate great Daos weren't prepared for him alone. There would never be only one sword vein in the universe's cultivation world. Why was he so anxious? He had dug this hole for himself, starting from the blue sky exile grounds. Now, he was ready to abandon it. The birth of an inner demon was a gradual process. It grew stronger step by step, unknowingly. Unlocking the inner demons was also a gradual process. Ever since the fifth ring, he did not bring his brothers back. It was this kind of subconscious that controlled him. When he came to Zhou Xian, he kept a low profile. Qing Xian was actually the same as him. They both faintly realized something, but the two of them were just not sure. The Heavenly Eye mission, this time, finally let him see an unfamiliar version of himself. He had become someone he didn't like. How was he enlightened? How was that possible? Killing and severing one's own path of retreat. This was what a true pawn should do. A day later, he left the core and entered the pulp of the earth. His speed suddenly increased. He had already gotten used to traveling through the core of the earth. Although he didn't communicate with the origin of destiny during the entire process, he was still very grateful. Along the way, there were many obstacles and enemies, but there were also many friends and kindness. He should be content. Qing Xian was still busy arranging the personnel for the next game. The opponent for the next game was the Heaven's Choice Taoist, so certain adjustments had to be made. As the actual controller of several consecutive battles in the demonic realm, he was given a heavy responsibility. His sect, Taishian Zhonghuang, supported him wholeheartedly. Xiaoyao Yu also saw him as one of his own because of their close relationship. Even Qingwei Immortal Sect and Yuanshu ascetic Zen treated him as a core member. For these two former spies, they should be content. But for some reason, he felt a little annoyed, but he didn't know where the annoyance came from. Was it because that guy wasn't by his side? That didn't seem to be the case. Those words he said to Kawa weren't nonsense. He really felt that even without the two of them, Zhou Xian would still be able to persevere. In fact, when the people of Zhou Xian decided to give their all in the fifth game, everything was already decided. When he was free, he would find a random peak in Xiaoyao Mountain and sit there silently. Like Lu Xiaoyi, he recalled the gains and losses of the past 700 years. But it was almost the same process, but he got almost a completely different answer. Lu Xiaoyi was wrong. A swordsman should be alone and live his life with a sword. Similarly, he was wrong. Daoist sects like the Three Pristines should command the world and lead the crowd. Lu Xiaoyi was wrong for not keeping a low profile, but he was wrong for not keeping a low profile. What was his purpose for coming here? Was it to be unknown, or to spread the light of the Three Pristines here? Little Meow, if one day both of us are no longer here and have gone to find our own path, what will you do? Little Meow seemed to have known that this day would come. Cats were not dogs. They were born with a kind of pride and independence, but they wouldn't always follow behind their owners. There are many places you can go, right? You could go back to Meow Star to take a look. You can go and chat with a big tree. You could go to Tianzhu to play with the ancient beasts. You can also stay in Zhouxian. Little Meow has made many friends here, but you won't be lonely. Senior brother, I understand. It's because of the two of you that a window was opened for Little Meow, allowing me to have the fortune to see how wonderful the outside world is. These wonderful things are enough for Little Meow to see for many, many years, until one day Little Meow understands. Senior brother will come back once in a while, right? Then bring Little Meow to see more wonderful worlds. Senior brother Qing Xian, I can wait. You must know that the lifespan of demonic beasts is much, much longer than that of humans. Qing Xian laughed involuntarily. You think too simply. You also understand. That's right. There will definitely be a day when we meet again. No matter which one of us. We will help you open another window. As long as you live long enough, there will be countless windows waiting for you. Little Meow asked softly, Senior brother Qing Xian, is Senior brother Xiaoyi not coming back? Qing Xian didn't answer, only looking into the distance. There was a sword shadow rushing from afar, but because it was too far away, it couldn't reach Xiaoyao Mountain. Only the sound of the sword was melodious, as if it was saying goodbye and saying something. After listening carefully for a long time, he sighed. Yes, that irresponsible guy has found his own path. I'm afraid he won't be coming back. Little Meow asked, go to a place very far away. Qing Xian snorted. I don't know. You could prepare a coffin for him, or at least a coffin for him to wear clothes. After being together for so long, Little Meow finally understood that the way they talked to each other couldn't be understood literally. It was completely opposite. Senior brother Qing Xian is leaving too. Qing Xian shook his head, his gaze firm. No, I'm not leaving. Little Meow, go and tell them that I've officially agreed to their request to take over the position of host of Zhou Xian's chessboard demonic realm. In addition, I want them to announce this news in front of all the cultivators in Zhou Xian. Tell them to make it clear that I'm Qing Xian, a member of the Three Pure Ones. Chapter 1452. Lu Xiaoyi leaped out of the earth's core and began to ascend. The sea of clouds passed quickly under his feet. No one could see his figure clearly. Only a long trail of liquid mist was left behind. In less than a moment, he had already arrived outside the Xiaoyao continent, but he did not return to the mountain. He only sent out a flying sword from afar to pay his respects to his friends there. This was not a farewell, but a long journey. He continued to ascend, and in an instant he arrived at the last barrier of the atmosphere, the heaven and earth chessboard. In the war chessboard, no one could freely enter and leave the heaven and earth chessboard unless they were unanimously approved by the top young spirits of Joseon. Of course, Lu Xiaoyi did not have such a special authorization, but he had other ways. Muyehu, let me pass. The heaven and earth chessboard shook, as if there was some kind of change. After the human laughed and passed, it slowly returned to normal. Lu Xiaoyi bathed in the starry sky, and his mood was unprecedentedly relaxed and open. This time, he had only entered the world for a few years. It was a very short time in his cultivation career, but it was also the most boring time he had ever stayed. Now that he had suddenly returned to the void, he felt that this was his real home. After flying out of the chi layer for 100 breaths, 2 breaths came from the left and right. Someone shouted, "Who is breaking into the world? Tell me your name." Lu Xiaoyi did not say much. He split his sword into 2 and waved it like 2 big pincers of a crab. His figure passed through the 2 people, leaving only 2 Tao celestial phenomena behind him. For a realm as large as the immortal Zhou Upper Realm, it would be impossible to completely seal off the entire realm with just a single person. In fact, no one would be stupid enough to do so. The heaven's chosen people were eager for the cultivators of Joseon to come out. They could either fight in waves or fight in the wild, so that they could fully utilize their advantage in numbers. Therefore, they guarded the direction of immortals who wanted to enter Zhou Immortals' territory more strictly. However, they gave Zhou Immortals' territory a way out and sensed them from afar. If a large number of Zhou Immortals came out to fight, the heavenly selection would even generously give them time to assemble an army. This was the reason why the 2 Yuanying had only come to check on Lu Xiaoyi after 100 breaths. Of course, after besieging Joseon for so long, Heaven's Choice had many large-scale detection formations. Thus, it was impossible for Lu Xiaoyi's tracks to be completely hidden from the eyes and ears of Heaven's Choice. However, it would take time to send cultivators over. The 2 Yuanying cultivators at the beginning were just trying to slow them down. However, they encountered an unreasonable person who moved at an extremely fast speed. His strategy was the same as when he came in. Speed was the key. Concealing one's whereabouts or not didn't mean much. Even if one concealed one's aura and flew like a snail, the probability of being discovered was still not small. Moreover, one wouldn't lose one's confidence and hide one's head and tail. Since Lu Xiaoyi had let go of his worries, he naturally didn't want to think of himself as a deserter. He also wasn't so Chinibyu as to charge into the enemy's main camp. He was only at the Great Dafa's side, carefree and unrestrained. He didn't think of himself as a deserter, but he didn't want to waste his time here. Joseon's morale had already risen. In the demonic realm of a chess game, it was very difficult for one person's strength to play a decisive role. It was time to let go and hand it over to the people who were supposed to protect this land. Furthermore, he suspected that the Heaven's chosen people would attack a few more times. Information was transmitted back and forth in the void. Cultivators began to surround him. Front, back, left, and right, they were responding to each other. However, in the void of the universe, Lu Xiaoyi was like a bird flying in the sky. The feeling of being able to move freely was not something that the so-called space of the heaven and earth chessboard could compare to. His speed made it impossible for anyone who was following him to keep up. As for the people in front, it would depend on how many breaths they could keep him here. It wasn't easy to keep a swordsman here in the vast void. A perfected lord in front of him spread out his mana. It formed a giant net that covered a radius of thousands of miles. His name was Flapping Heavenly Net. It meant that even if you had wings on your head, you would only be able to flap your wings and would not be able to leave this barrier. It could be seen that he was very confident in the adhesion effect. In fact, it was a mutated application of the Tai Chi Dao realm. In the Heaven's Choice continent, this was a small Dao tablet that belonged to a small country, known as the Dao of Mud. He still didn't know what he was going to encounter. Lu Xiaoyi didn't change his direction at all, because changing his direction meant that he would encounter more opponents, waste more time, and kill more people. He directly crashed into the River of Swords, turning himself into a ray of light in the torrential River of Swords. This was the worst face-to-face collision in a battle of magical powers between cultivators. There is no need to say much about who was at a disadvantage and who was at an advantage. A large hole was created in the Tao of Mud's net. Although he didn't know much about the Tao of Tai Chi, in a collision, the instant contact was more about explosive power. Under this kind of pure power, the Tao realm didn't even have time to spread out before it was cut into pieces by the flying swords. However, that perfected lord was very smart. He wasn't in the flapping heavenly net. This was the special characteristic of cultivators from small Taoist orthodoxies. It wasn't easy for them to survive, so they were always careful. However, they wouldn't just stand there and shout, "So-and-so is here, bring it on." So-and-so must always stand outside of danger. This kind of caution saved his life. Of course, it was also the reason why Lu Xiaoyi didn't want to waste time on him. Finally, someone recognized his origin. It's that fifth ring swordsman. Everyone, don't follow too closely. Lu Xiaoyi had made a name for himself 3 times in Heaven's Choice. The first time was when he was sent to Heaven's Choice to fight the waves in the Echo Valley. At that time, he was still a small Yuanying. The second time was an undeserved reputation, but it was also a bad reputation. He brought the outlaws of Heaven's Choice back to the 5th ring to help the 5th ring, annihilating the monk army, eliminating the insect swarm, and destroying the winged people. To be honest, Heaven's Choice Taoist orthodoxies were secretly happy about this. The first time was from an opposing orthodoxy, while the other 2 were from foreign races. This meant that the combat power of Heaven's Choice cultivators was still not bad. The third time was in Josian's Heaven and Earth chessboard. When Heaven's Choice cultivators knew that there was such a fierce person in the chessboard demonic realm, their will to fight was greatly affected. This was because it was very difficult to find an individual who could contend against him. There were many cultivators who were unconvinced, but most of them expressed it verbally. If you asked someone to specifically deal with this fierce person, they would immediately give up. No one took up this topic. After knowing that this fierce person was breaking through, the people chasing after him naturally slowed down. They didn't want to get too close. They wanted to get as far away as possible. Everyone knew that the void was the swordsman's territory. If he wanted to run, then let him run. What was there to stop? It wasn't like he didn't pay for going to the brothel. The news was still being delivered very frequently, but the cultivators at the scene were a little cautious, especially those who had used teleportation at the beginning. They were all so frightened that they broke out in a cold sweat. If they moved within the range of the sword and were targeted by the flying sword, how could it be good? It was better to leave such a person to those great cultivators, such as primordial spirit cultivators or even young gods, to deal with. This was the wisdom of small figures. Of course, big figures had great wisdom. For example, hundreds of Taoist young gods colluded with each other, but none of them directly moved. Of course, they could catch up with him. It would just take a little effort, but one of the young gods was telling the truth. Why chase him? Why kill him? Do you think that Heaven's Choice doesn't have enough trouble and that the 5th ring sword vein will see us as enemies? Another young god was even more sinister. I've already informed the Buddhist sect. Maybe they'll be interested? Chapter 1453. In the distance, 3 perfected cultivators joined hands and communicated with you, Yuan. Fellow Taoist from the Impermanence Monument, I wish you a safe journey. These were cultivators who had sensed the Impermanence Great Tao from the Impermanence Monument. Although they didn't know each other, there was a connection between them. What they had gained from the Impermanence Monument might have helped them. Cultivators cared about this. This was a kind of fate. The core of the Battle of Tao was to gain momentum, not the person. Lu Xiaoyi easily broke through the last barrier. He turned his head back and looked into the distance, his heart calm. After taking this step, some people might say that he was selfish. He didn't care, because in his and Qing Xian's judgment, Heaven's Choice wouldn't be able to hold on for 2 or 3 more rounds. Because of Ming Hui's move, he also saw through Heaven's Choice Buddhism. In his opinion, Heaven's Choice Buddhism wouldn't be able to hold on any longer. This wasn't a presumption, but evidence. Didn't the great Buddhist forces in the main world outside the Fifth Ring retreat without a fight when they were surrounded by Taoists? This made Liu Xiaoyi have a deeper understanding of the battle of cultivators. It was cruel and mysterious. Due to the different abilities of cultivators compared to mortals, their attitude toward war was also different. Here, there was no concept of gaining something by going on an expedition. Cultivators looked at the long term and didn't have to worry about wasting the country's strength. In essence, it was just a trial that took a longer time and was larger in scale. In the distant void, the spiritual vigor was chaotic, as if it was going to devour someone. However, in his eyes now, he, who understood the nature of the battle of cultivators, was no longer afraid of it. The battle of Tao was still not as ruthless as the battle of clans. In the Buddhist camp, more than 10 great Buddhas of the Buddhist sect gathered together. It was time to make a decision. Monk Haoda's voice was low and deep. He didn't say anything, but went straight to the point. The universe is vast, the great Tao has collapsed, and the human heart is unpredictable. There are still thousands of years before the end of the era. We, Heaven's Choice Buddhism, have left the main world in advance and achieved our basic goal. From a beginning to the end, we never treated Zhou Xian as our real target. We had already reached a consensus on this point before we set out. The only difference was that we thought that we could force Zhou Xian to sign some kind of contract with the upper realm, but we didn't expect that it would become a half-dead, half-alive mess. This proved that our initial judgment was correct. Do not underestimate the determination of any realm to resist. Don't overestimate Heaven's Choice's overall strength. This was going to be a long process, and it was not something that could be settled with a single battle. If they really took down Zhou Xian, they would have to face the endless hostility and revenge of the main world of self-cultivators. That would be a real disaster. If that's the case, we won't have to do anything for at least 1,000 years. We can only wait to put out fires everywhere, helplessly going back and forth between Zhou Xian and Heaven's Choice. Seeing that the other great Buddhas did not object, how to change his tone. At the very least, we still got a lot. We've cleared out the most restless forces within Heaven's Choice and ascertained the positions of the ancient beasts. If it weren't for this war, we would never have known about this. We have figured out the position of the Buddhist forces in the realm when attacking a realm. For example, Zhou Xian's 10,000 Buddhas and bitter meditation. In the end, they still chose to maintain the conservative status quo, choosing the realm over the orthodoxy. This is something that we need to think about. Finally, about the Fifth Ring. Although it's far away, the Fifth Ring still affected us in its special way. This raises a question. How are we going to get along with the Fifth Ring in the future? How are we going to position it? I think that this will affect the future of Heaven's Choice to a large extent. How does gaze turn serious? The battle of Zhou Xian will end here. The echelon will leave and wait for the future. We need to closely monitor the actions of the Taoists. I estimate that a large-scale war won't happen, but there will definitely be small-scale conflicts. This is also a kind of test. If the Taoists are interested, then we will accompany them. But there are 2 things that we need to do now. How to chant the name of Buddha. In the dozens of universes around Zhou Xian, there is still 1 large, 2 small, and 3 insect swarms. After more than 70 years, we already know their movements like the back of our hands. How can we return empty-handed this time? We'll split into 3 groups and eliminate them in one fell swoop. In addition, announce the attitude of Heaven's Choice Buddhism to the origin world. We will not tolerate any foreign race that dares to invade the origin world's human cultivation world. This includes the winged men. All the Buddhas chanted the name of Buddha to show their support. The universe was too big, and the cultivation world was too big. The Taoists had split into countless orthodoxies, tearing and biting each other. Everyone seemed to have gotten used to it. Actually, the essence of Buddhism was the same. It was impossible for it to be a monolithic block forever. In general, the origin world's Buddhism was more aggressive and sought change. Therefore, they didn't hesitate to mobilize the insect swarms and the winged men. As for Heaven's Choice Buddhism, they were more conservative and bound by some ancient restrictions. They were more conservative in terms of racial division. However, being aggressive and conservative was only relative. For example, the origin world's Buddhism supported their orthodox position and the indiscriminate spread of Buddhism. This was actually the attitude of the true Buddha in Heaven's Eye. In order to move towards the origin world, Heaven's Choice Buddhism tacitly agreed with the attitude of the senior monk who performed the Buddha's will. They were willing to not take the initiative to destroy the foundations of other orthodoxies in the origin world. The differences in the upper echelons caused the separation of the human world. Therefore, there was a faint crack in the origin world's Buddhism. Heaven's Choice Buddhism killed Zerg and condemned the winged men to vent their dissatisfaction with the origin world's Buddhism interfering with the performance of the Buddha's will. It was a conversation across space. Heaven's Choice Buddhism began to leave in an orderly manner. In the distance, the Taoist camp watched coldly. It was very rude for the Buddhists to leave without any notice. In any case, they were an allied army. How could they leave without a care? It was very normal for the relationship between both sides. A Taoist young god smiled and said, "Looking at the order of the Buddhist departure, they seem to have left some traces behind. They seem to be waiting for us to come into contact." Taoist Pang sneered. "Insignificant. Why bother with them? They won't harm our foundation." What a joke. A young god asked, "Senior brother, what should we do? Return to Heaven's Choice?" Taoist Pang sneered. "The Buddhists may not return to Heaven's Choice. Why do we have to look up to others? Everyone, there are 9 continents in the upper realm of Zhou. Among them, there are 7 Taoist schools and 2 Buddhist schools. If you look carefully, they're also the foundation of Taoism. This time, we met happily and discussed with each other to apply what we have learned. If we don't experience actual combat, how can we deal with the great changes in the future? Contact them. We, the Heaven's Choice Taoist School, will hold a banquet in outer space and apologize for our rudeness this time. We are also willing to bear all the costs of this competition. Heaven's Choice Zhou Xian Taoist School. We will always be on good terms and work together for the future of the universe. We will share a beautiful tomorrow. The prerequisite for negotiations was to have a battle. It was not like what Zhou Xian thought could be resolved in one trip. You had to show your strength in the war. Only with an attitude of never giving and would you be worthy of respect. Only then would you be able to obtain a satisfactory agreement. Since ancient times, there had been no exception. Chapter 1454. Lu Xiaoyi had discovered the changes in the Buddhist sect. Everything was clear in his heart. He just didn't know if what he had done in the core of the celestial Zhou continent would affect the Heaven's Volition Buddhist sect. Now that everything was settled, his mood was relaxed. The evasive sword flowed with light, dragging a brilliant trail behind it. Alone, he rode the sword away. He decided to complete a magnificent feat in his cultivation life. Fly back to the 5th ring. After experiencing so many obstacles, searching for the coordinates, locating the main world, and being picked up by Lord Taipu and Lord Gaiwa twice, he already had a certain understanding of this long path. This was all thanks to the selfless introduction of the 2 innate spiritual treasures to the universe along the way. The introduction of one spiritual treasure wasn't very comprehensive, but the 2 spiritual treasures complemented each other. In addition to the experience of the Azure Mystic Iron Disciple, his own powerful constellation positioning, deep understanding of the coordinates, and the abnormal brain capacity of a perfected lord, the entire journey route became clear in his mind. He didn't dare to say that he was 90% sure, but he was at least 80% sure. To the swordsman, this was more than enough. He didn't want to complete this journey in the negative space. His goal was to spend 1,000 years to fly back from the main world. He wanted to see what heights he could reach in his deep communication with the universe along the way. This wasn't a whim, but the result of careful consideration. Ever since he came to Zhou, he had encountered many opportunities, which made him indulge in some kind of illusion. He felt that his cultivation had always been on the right path, although it was a bit rushed every time he ascended to the upper realm, forming his core when he was about to reach the foundation establishment stage, forming his nascent soul when he was about to reach the end of the Jin Dan, and attaining his monarch status when he was about to reach the end of the Yuanying stage. All seemed to have a smooth journey. However, he had never considered that he would only find a pit when he reached the end of the road. What if he couldn't find a pit? This method of ascending to the upper realm was actually full of uncertainty, and he was still complacent about being able to catch the last bus every time. Until in the core, under the hidden malice of Minghui, under the unclear attitude of the heavenly eyes, under the subtle influence of the destiny's source, under the accumulated doubts from previous battles, he finally understood where he had gone wrong. His mistake was that he didn't have enough communication with the universe and nature. His mistake was that he spent too much time thinking about people's hearts. Swordsman, why do you think about people's hearts? If he wanted to see a person's heart, wouldn't it be easy to use his flying sword to dig it out? He thought that he had seen enough of the vicissitudes of the universe when he was a soul energy body, which was his natural advantage. However, this was actually wrong. During the years he had been drifting in the universe as a soul energy body, his so-called familiarity was nothing more than watching from afar. He didn't dare to go deep into the natural phenomena to understand the nature of the universe, because his little bit of energy would be devoured before he could even get close. It was only a superficial knowledge and not a deep understanding. This kind of knowledge could help him when his cultivation was still low, but when he became a true monarch, this kind of superficial understanding could no longer help him. In fact, he lacked a deep understanding of the universe, especially after his body was reshaped by the small universe when he formed his nascent soul. The conclusion was that he needed to achieve a deeper level of compatibility between his body and this universe. Only then would he be able to meet the conditions of having all 36 innate Taos at the same time. When the small universe of his body and the great universe of this world were truly seamlessly connected, only then would he be able to achieve the greatest achievement during the changing of a universe epoch. This process was also the process of him going from Yin spirit to primordial spirit, then to Yang spirit to half immortal, and finally to immortal ascension. To achieve this, he needed to be in full contact with the universe and nature. He needed to be completely focused and not care about the so-called competition of orthodoxies, races, and realms in the human cultivation world. When everyone was fighting and fighting, he still hadn't reached the level that Crow Ancestor had. Then his so-called participation would be nothing more than a joke. If he wasn't strong enough, his participation could only go with the flow. He wouldn't be able to make his own voice heard, and he wouldn't be able to affect those changes. Was 1,000 years enough? He didn't know. He was now 1,000 years old, and he still had nearly 2,000 years of life left. So what if he used all of it to complete this journey? In the end, human cultivation was a process of communicating with the universe and nature, not a process of competing with humans or other races. He didn't dare to think about such a choice in the past. He always wanted to find some kind of shortcut, such as the space crack, the anti-space transition, or the heavenly teleportation system. But now he suddenly realized that on the first day he entered the Tao, the elders had been repeating his sentence. There were no shortcuts in cultivation. Cultivation would treat you the way you treat cultivation. You couldn't always have the last bus to ride. Abandoning everything and exiling the universe was his experience for himself. It might be a little late, and this should have started after he formed his nascent soul. But it wasn't too late to realize it now. It was better to do it than not. His goal was clear, but what tested him was time. In order to be clearer about his ideas, he didn't even bring Little Meow along. There was no need. This was a solo journey. Zhou Xian was surrounded by a large number of cultivators. They were all cultivators from the dozens of universes near Zhou Xian. Their main purpose was to get the most direct result from the battlefield in Zhou Xian, and then determine the attitude of their own realms. In history, in the eyes of many realms in this star field, the upper realm in Zhou Xian was a very annoying existence. They were arrogant, self-righteous, and full of a sense of superiority. They were the best in the world, and that was the true portrayal of them. What was there in fact? It was just a much larger and very unique realm form. It might even be the place where the so-called fated cultivators achieved Tao. That was all. In the history of Zhou Xian, they actually didn't have anything to show off. For example, expeditions, fighting against powerful enemies, and dazzling performance in wars with foreign races. It was a realm that closed its doors and admired itself. This was the unified view of Zhou Xian in the outside world. But when the Heaven's Choice continent launched an attack on Zhou Xian, the direction of their mood had unknowingly changed. Perhaps the upper realm in Zhou Xian was indeed strong on the outside, but weak on the inside. But in the hundreds of thousands of years of existence, it didn't seem to have invaded the surrounding realms, bullied the weak, or interfere with the internal affairs of other realms. Then, if Heaven's Choice was changed to him to be the master of Zhou Xian, would such a harmonious situation continue? The answer was uncertain, or it could be said that the surrounding forces were full of vigilance and vigilance against Heaven's Choice. If they had to choose, they would rather choose the people in Zhou Xian, who were more familiar with them and less ambitious. Therefore, although they didn't form an alliance to help Zhou Xian, in terms of morality, they stood on Zhou Xian's side. This was the general form of the surrounding realms. Therefore, when they saw a cultivator flying from Zhou Xian's direction, they couldn't wait to know something. Lu Xiaoyi was surprised to find that he had become a hot commodity now. Chapter 1455. He had no interest in answering these endless questions. You want to know? Can't you go and find out yourself? He couldn't be bothered with these people. Thus, he increased his speed and gradually moved further and further away from the encirclement. Fortunately, these people did not have any organization structure and were purely a bunch of stragglers, each doing their own thing. How could they stop a swordsman with such speed? He plunged into the deep space of a universe and disappeared without a trace. Several years later, in a certain space region several universes away from Zhou Xian, a great battle between humans and insects was underway. This wasn't rare in the history of cultivation in the universe. Many powerful domains and orthodoxies were very happy to do this. But what was different this time was that the humans were all Buddhist monks in a uniform formation. Due to the fact that the space region was relatively remote, this was obviously the first time that the humans had taken the initiative to attack. It was relatively rare for Buddhists to launch such a long-distance attack, and it was even such a large-scale initiative. The situation was almost one-sided due to the asymmetry in strength between both sides. The monks had the absolute initiative, and although this insect swarm could be considered a large insect swarm, it was still slightly inferior to one of the 5 super-large insect swarms that had attacked the 5th ring. Under the attacks of the Heaven's Choice Buddhists, they were defeated. However, the Buddhist attacks weren't smooth either. This was because many of the Buddhist techniques weren't suitable for the insect swarm, especially those profound Buddhist secret techniques. Against insects that didn't talk about the afterlife and the past, it was like playing the lute to a cow. The insects were only good at bloody battles in the present world. Relatively speaking, the more superficial body techniques of the Buddhists were more effective against them. The battle wasn't very satisfactory. It wasn't as easy as expected and only relied on its size to gain the upper hand. In the battle against the insect swarm, they actually relied on their numbers to overwhelm the other party. This was a humiliation to the humans. It was also a rare training opportunity. The Heaven's Choice Buddhists learned from the battle. This was also their preparation for the future. At the same time, the Heaven's Choice sect was holding a party in the space outside Zhou. This was a grand and enthusiastic event for cultivators. After many years of communication and bargaining, both sides finally got a satisfactory result. Only after going through battle and acknowledging each other's strength would there be true peace. Trauma would eventually pass. The living had to look forward. In the Battle of Tao, no one would keep this so-called hatred in their mouths. They could only help each other move forward with one hand, while the other hand did not forget to use the weapons. I hate to forget. Only then would he be able to walk further. Even if he hated it, he couldn't forget it. Only then would he not lose his vigilance. But at least for now, the two sides were happily meeting in the space outside Zhou. It was as if they were old friends who had not seen each other for many years. Among the many powerful cultivators, a smallie master was particularly eye-catching. It was a graceful, elegant, and handsome young man. At first glance, one could tell that he was the most standard member of the Taoist school. His actions and speech revealed the profound and pure spirit of the Taoist school. The way he interacted with others, his understanding of the Tao, and the macroscopic universe all made one sigh with emotion, as if they were bathed in a spring breeze. This was Qing Xian. When faced with the choice of path, he and Lu Xiaoyi chose a completely different direction. It was hard to say who was better and who was worse. Only Kawa led Little Meow and stood alone in the depths of the crowd. They were oblivious to the commotion around them. Little Meow nibbled on the celestial fruit from Heaven's Choice and asked curiously, the current senior apprentice brother Qing Xian, and the one in the past, which one is the real one? Kawa sighed, both are real. It's just that different periods have different thoughts. Little Meow understood. Just like chameleons? Kawa nodded. You can understand it that way, for survival. Little Meow lowered its head and continued to nibble on its celestial fruit. I don't like chameleons. Kawa rubbed its head. I don't like it either. Existence is the hard truth, whether you like it or not. Lu Xiaoyi finally flew out of the sky region where the world of cultivation was densely packed. With Zhou as the core, there were hundreds of big and small sky regions in the surrounding dozens of universes. The celestial phenomena were also clustered together. There were more worlds of cultivation where the atmosphere of cultivation was strong. On the other hand, it was like a desert of spiritual vigor. Even if you flew for years or decades, you would not see a single place where human cultivators were active. Here, celestial phenomena of other natures would appear. Those were dangerous, changing, filled with endless traps and purely natural features. Not only would humans go extinct here, even the void beasts would stay away from such places. Lu Xiaoyi's attitude towards these celestial phenomena was always to skim over them. When he was in Yuanying, he would spend more time searching for Ziqing, but he rarely went deep into the celestial phenomena to understand the principles of heaven and earth contained in the celestial phenomena. Now, what he was doing was the opposite. He mainly wanted to understand the changes of the Tao state in the celestial phenomena, how it was formed, how it happened, how it operated, and how it grew and multiplied endlessly in the void. In this process, if he happened to come across it, he would collect some Ziqing. This was a qualitative change. Not every celestial phenomenon in the universe was worth studying. With his current realm and vision, he could understand the origins of a small number of celestial phenomena. Most of the other celestial phenomena involved the direction of the Tao state that he was not proficient in. After all, he was only proficient in 6 of the 36 innate great Taos. The cornerstones of the universe's celestial phenomena were the 5 grandmas, Tai, Tai Chu, Tai Shi, Tai Su, and Tai Chi. Tai, only the state of a universe that was boundless and empty. Tai Chu, formless and without substance. Only innate Qi, the state of the universe that was more primitive than chaos. Tai Shi, formless and not visible to the senses, the state of the primeval universe before the creation of heaven and earth. Taisu, the state of the universe that was primitive. Tai Chi, the state of the universe where yin and yang were not separated. He had not obtained the Tai fragment yet, but this did not stop him from understanding the five grandmas in person. What kind of understanding was the most realistic? It was to be in it. Celestial phenomena were the special products of the five grandmas under the combined power of the universe's changes. It was a special phenomenon of the universe that was formed because of an imbalance in a certain aspect. It was like how you could not see the internal power of the ocean on the calm surface of the sea. Only in the stormy waves could you observe its essence. Celestial phenomena were actually a window for cultivators to observe the changes in the universe, a way that made it easier for them to discover the rules. When Ji had said that after the collapse of Tai, it would be the other four grandmas, Lu Xiaoyi deeply agreed with his explanation. This was an inevitable law of the universe's development. Even if the epoch changed, it would not change this essence. It was impossible to reverse the order within. Right now, he was relying on his shallow understanding of the fifth Grand Elder, as well as all the knowledge about the Tao state that he had collected from the major Taoist sects such as Xiaoyao, Xinyuan, and Taixien, as well as his personal experience and immersive exploration. His speed might be very slow, but if he persevered in 1,000 years, what else could he not grasp? Not to mention that he would have the chance to obtain fragments in the process. When the five grandmas were done collapsing, his understanding of the five Tao states might have caught up with the rhythm of the collapse of the great Tao. This was also the reason why he had to drift in the universe and fully come into contact with nature. The journey of 1,000 years was not a hot-headed impulse, but a deep cultivation purpose. Chapter 1456. In the 7th year of his journey, he entered an interesting celestial phenomenon called the turbulent shock wave. It was like an energy field. The turbulence was built between two stars. One star was in the stage of implosion, while the other star was in the opposite stage of expansion. As a result, a shock wave was formed between the two distant stars when they interacted with each other. Everything in this region, including meteorites, asteroids, meteorites, and other large solid objects, were shaken in a fine powder by the shock wave for a long time, becoming the smallest dust in the universe. These dust particles gathered more and more, but they couldn't escape the attraction of the two stars, so they formed a gray, misty turbulence of particles. The shape of the turbulence was like a huge juju pit. The two ends were small, connected to the two stars, and the middle was big. It vaguely looked like a corona. Due to the strong attraction and repulsion forces, every tiny dust particle here was vibrating. From afar, it looked like a surging river. In fact, it was just an illusion of the human eye. The river wasn't flowing, but the tiny particles in the entire region were dancing under the force. Under the illumination of the stars, it looked like a flowing river. This was a celestial phenomenon that Lu Xiaoyi had never seen before. It was different from all the forms recorded in the sect's ancient books, and it made him very curious. Whether it was in Xinyuan or in the Carefree Travel sect, there were actually countless records about the cosmic celestial phenomenon. The cultivators who went out to explore would record every strange celestial phenomenon they saw, and then add it to their own judgment and analysis. When a sect persisted for tens of thousands of years, the number of celestial phenomena recorded would be extremely terrifying. It still didn't represent all the celestial phenomena in the universe. It was still a very small part. This was the significance of cultivators exploring the universe. In Lu Xiaoyi's opinion, this was probably the origin of the Crow ancestors' astronomical swordplay. It was only because the Crow ancestor's ability was strong enough that he could perfectly replicate the power of the celestial phenomenon. For other people, they could actually learn a lot from the cosmic celestial phenomenon, but they couldn't reach the level of the Golden Origin. However, as long as you persevere, You will definitely be able to grow from small to large, from small to large, from small to large, and finally evolve into a universe. Unique celestial phenomena like this usually included the grand quintuple Tao realm. They were the cornerstones of the formation of the universe. Together with yin and yang, impermanence, and so on, this was the normal state of cosmic celestial phenomena. It was filled with complexity and challenge. Lu Xiaoyi's so-called journey was not just running. It was more about seeing things along the way. It could be celestial phenomena, or it could be the world of cultivation. It was the calmness of watching and learning as he walked, not the pursuit of someone behind him. As a result, he decided to stay here for a while, both to satisfy his curiosity and to learn a few things. In the end, he could also add a name to Xuanyuan's enormous astronomical records. As the first discoverer, he had the right to name it. Of course, he would also leave his name, Lu Xiaoyi, in the ancient records. This was a temptation that was hard to resist. Perhaps every cultivator had a similar feeling. When time passed and the characters were gone, they would still leave their achievements in the universe for the later generations to see. He found a very interesting situation in Xuanyuan's astronomical records. That was, among all the strange astronomical records, there was one person who discovered the most celestial phenomena in Xianyuan for tens of thousands of years. This person was the Crow ancestor. From this, it could be seen that the Crow ancestor must have gone further and wider than others in the cultivation. This was actually a kind of cultivation attitude. He finally understood now. Fortunately, it was not too late. In the whole jujube seed-shaped turbulent zone, the force acting on the two ends was the smallest. The force acting in the middle was the most intense. Therefore, he started to enter from one end, and then slowly went deeper. As he went deeper, he only felt that he was shaking like a sieve, even more than the ice guest's sword. When the ice guest was charging, only his hands were shaking, but now his whole body was shaking. Every part of his body was in the force field, and nothing was left out. His hands, feet, head, cheeks, eyelids, crotch, and even his internal organs were shaking. This kind of force could shake a small planet into powder in a long time, which showed its power. With his body that had been transformed by the small universe, he could not ignore this kind of force. When he reached the limit, he stopped. Before his brain was shaken into paste, he began to carefully experience the profound truth contained in it. In such a place, it was very stupid to fight. What he needed was to feel the mechanism, discover the rules, and achieve a certain resonance between himself and the two stars. This process was the process of exploring the truth of the five ties. Maybe one turbulent zone could not teach him too much, but if he persevered, when he understood countless strange celestial phenomena, he would naturally understand the secret of the origin of the universe. It was a process of accumulation, and finally from quantitative change to qualitative change. This was from the perspective of exploring the mystery of the universe. From a swordsman's natural instinct for fighting, he could also feel the value of this kind of celestial phenomenon. If he could create this kind of force field vibration in 2 or hundreds of thousands of flying swords, it could achieve a better effect than the pure attack of the flying swords in some specific battle situations. For example, it was obviously not suitable to use the flying swords to stab things like microbes one by one. But if he could create this kind of force field, no matter how many creatures there were, no matter how small they were, he would not miss any of them. In addition, this kind of force field was also useful for the large-scale forbidden spells of the spellcasters. It could shatter the cornerstone of the spells, which was another way to defend. If you put your mind to it, almost every celestial phenomenon had a fighting value. The key was how much could you discover from it? How could you make use of it? Lu Xiaoyi had a deep impression of the golden origin of the Crow ancestor from the sword Dao steel. But that kind of large-scale, celestial phenomenon was not something he could understand at the moment. So he thought that there were many levels of celestial phenomena. Some were complicated, some were simple, some were violent, and some were relatively mild. There was no absolute difference between them. Even if he could not achieve what the crow ancestor did, he could at least create a minor celestial swordsmanship for himself, which was also very useful. When his strength gradually increased and he reached the level of a demigod in the future, the minor celestial phenomenon would naturally become a major celestial phenomenon. Under the guidance of this thought, Lu Xiaoyi stayed in the turbulent zone for a few years. As his understanding of celestial phenomena deepened, he also went deeper and deeper. He gradually began to drift towards the most intense area of the turbulent force field, the coronal ring in the middle. Chapter 1457. In the cultivation world of the universe, there are all kinds of strange things. Countless orthodoxies have their own advantages. The domain with the name Wang Jiangjie was a small domain with a single Taoist tradition. Its origin was unknown, and it was just one of the countless branches of Taoism. Over the long river of time, because of its remote location, it slowly broke away from the mainstream cultivation world and gradually formed its own style of cultivation. In the eyes of Taoism, this is blasphemy to Taoism. But in the countless small worlds of the universe, this kind of situation is everywhere. Not every world can keep up with the mainstream. The scarcity of great cultivators and the fact that they live alone is the reason why they are out of touch with the mainstream. The obstacles caused by distance and space are not only for Lu Xiaoyi. He has a lot of opportunities and a lot of friends. Now, he is still staggering in the universe. It can be imagined that those worlds that are out of the mainstream cultivation world are mostly limited to the universe where the world is located. There are very few great cultivators who go to the universe void to explore. There are only a few great cultivators with great ability. If you leave, who will take care of the world? In the fifth ring, in Zhouxian, the kind of travel that the cultivators of big sects and forces are used to, in fact, does not exist in small worlds. Wang Jiangjie is such a small world. There is only one orthodoxy, Wang Jiangjie Dao. Because there are no foreign ideas to compete with it, the small world can't support a second orthodoxy. Here, there are several monarchs. A small place can't produce a sun spirit. There are also more than 10 Yuanying. Basically, they're the main force of Wang Jiangjie. As for the disciples below, they can't go out of the universe. Inside Wang Jiangjie Mountain, there is a very immortal style. It is the kind of ancient architecture. Just by looking at the architecture, it is an authentic Taoist inheritance. But how does it match the name Wang Jiang? Ali was a newly ascended Yuanying cultivator who had only reached the Yuanying stage for 100 years. She was barely qualified to leave the universe. She was barefooted and wore a long skirt. This was also the style of this domain. In the large domains of the origin world, she was probably one of the ethnic minorities. She is graceful and has a unique charm. In the King Zombie Hall, she saw the master who had summoned her, Supreme Huan Pei, a beautiful middle-aged woman. This was also a characteristic of the King Zombie boundary. For some reason, those who could reach a higher level in this place were usually Kuan cultivators. Ali, you go and herd those old zombies. Recently, the situation in the universe is getting more and more urgent. There are always scattered groups of bugs running rampant everywhere. Although our King Zombie is located in a remote area, this kind of thing is hard to say. It's better to be prepared in advance. Ali nodded. Yes, master. Is Ali going alone? Perfected Lord Huan Pei nodded. Your senior sisters and the others are mostly out on errands and are understaffed. You've been in a stalemate with them several times, so there shouldn't be any problems in guiding them. They're all old stalemates, so it's easy. What's the matter? Are you afraid of going out into the void alone? Ali shook his head excitedly. I'm not afraid. I've been to the outer universe, void, many times. Furthermore, I'm familiar with the route. Don't worry, master. As the name suggested, the King Zombie realm was a Taoist orthodoxy that focused on executing zombies and controlling zombies. Perhaps this wasn't the initial form of this Taoist branch, but the King Zombie realm had a unique place that granted this realm a unique cultivation and combat style. There was a small space cave in the boundary, and nameless Taoist corpses were often thrown out. The origin of these corpses could not be traced. These corpses were not the corpses of cultivators, but the corpses that had been processed artificially or after being soaked in an unknown space for a long time began to mutate. They had some characteristics of zombies. Their bodies were abnormally tough, comparable to demonic beasts. They could also fly in the void on their own, but their speed was not fast enough and they were slightly clumsy. Naturally formed zombies were one thing, but in the cultivation world, man-made zombies were a big taboo. It was easy to be attacked by mainstream orthodoxies. In the human world, it was an intolerable behavior. This was also the reason why cultivators of King Zombie Dao were not willing to go out. They also knew that their fighting style would easily arouse the suspicion of others, so for a long time, they had been playing by themselves and rarely communicated with the outside world. However, this didn't mean that Zombie Wong was a cruel and merciless anti-humanist, because these zombies weren't created by them. It was just that they couldn't stop the mysterious spatial hole from gushing out. In a year, there would always be a dozen or so zombies appearing. Excluding those that were damaged beyond use, Zombie Wong had accumulated a considerable zombie army over time. When did King Zombie Dao begin to try to control and use these zombies? No one could say for sure. Based on the principle of recycling waste, after so many years, King Zombie Dao had summed up a set of effective methods of controlling zombies. As time went by, it became the most important fighting method of King Zombie Dao. It could only be said that their original orthodoxy was relatively weak, especially in terms of fighting power. Therefore, in the dependence on the environment, they changed from a Taoist orthodoxy to a zombie orthodoxy. As long as the space cave kept throwing out zombies, they would not be able to get out of this encirclement. After these zombies were trained to be useful, they were probably equivalent to the weak existence of ordinary human cultivators. If they were placed in the orthodox big sects or big forces, they would be of little value. They would not spend a lot of effort to create these things that could not be of much help. But for King Zombie Dao, their abilities were still very good. They were reliable helpers in battle. This was a different perception brought about by their own lack of strength. King Zombie Dao divided zombies into 3 categories: wild zombies, old zombies, and king zombies. Among them, wild zombies were the ones that were just thrown out of the mysterious cave. They had not been domesticated yet, so they could not be controlled freely. These wild zombies needed special training and domestication to eliminate their wild nature. They could not be turned into real idiots. This was a process that required a lot of experience. Well, he was not qualified for it yet. Old zombies were the ones that had been domesticated and could be used to fight. King zombies were the best among the old zombies. Their fighting power was far stronger than ordinary old zombies. They were one of the few who were carefully taken care of. Ali was going to take some of the old zombies in the sect to become king zombies. This was a necessary procedure. Because zombies would not talk about faith and loyalty, they needed to be taken out and trained regularly. The training place was a celestial phenomenon not far from the King Zombie world. Through the effect of the shock wave of the universe and some special incantation, the old zombies could get rid of the accumulated anger of the old zombies. This was called King Zombie Dao. Because they have been trained, they are quite obedient, with human cultivators taking them to the celestial phenomenon in batches. They are melted down in the furnace to reach the best state as fighting zombies. This is the daily work of Yuanian cultivators like Ali. She had gone out many times to become king zombies with her senior fellow apprentices before, so she had some experience. Now everyone was busy, so it was inevitable for her to become a king zombie alone. Every king zombie would have this day. Chapter 1458. She drove 50 old zombies out with ease, and they jumped in a row behind her. Then, they began to jump out of the layer of air. It looked very strange, but in the king's zombie domain, whether it was cultivators or mortals, they had already adapted to this situation, so they were not surprised. After successfully exiting the atmosphere, Ali identified the direction and flew in a certain direction. There were many things to pay attention to in this, including flying speed, controlling divine sense, and cursing restrictions. If she was not proficient in this, she would become an exploding corpse. A group of zombies would be in a mess and go their separate ways. If this really happened, she would lose the combat power of the orthodoxy, and she would also be punished. Fortunately, Ali was still quite familiar with all this, and this was not the first time she drove zombies. The familiar scenery, the familiar operation, and the boundless void, there was no disturbance from the outside. This was also one of the benefits of the king's zombie domain being located in a remote place. There were no humans, no void beasts, and no living creatures. It was like a forgotten corner. Other than loneliness, there was nothing here, because Ali had not formed her nascent soul for more than 100 years. The furthest she went out of the universe's void was only a month's distance away. In fact, she had not gone to the other places in the universe's void. This was because her orthodoxy had a very big shortcoming in the universe's positioning. If she went into the void without permission, the probability of not returning was very high. Not every cultivator had the ability to position the stars. This was standard for large sects and large forces, but for small sects and small forces, it was an unattainable dream. One's foundation determined one's knowledge. After all, there are only a few orthodox Taoists in this world. The journey was peaceful and smooth, except for a few irritable old zombies who always wanted to jump out and act on their own. Fortunately, Ali suppressed them strongly, so they did not cause too much trouble. This was the reason why they had to drive zombies. These things still had their wild nature and would not listen to reason. In order to get rid of this instinct of theirs, they could only drag a group of old zombies whose time was up to walk around the astronomical phenomenon every few decades and use the shock waves to eliminate their negative instincts. A month later, Ali arrived at the celestial phenomenon. Looking from afar, it looked like a dusky date pit that was constantly rotating. The so-called walking zombies were actually not the main theme of flying in the void for more than a month. The real walking zombies would start when they entered this celestial phenomenon. She let the old zombies enter through the tip of the date seed. The pressure there was the least, so they could adapt and calm down their instinctive fear. Finally, they would obediently follow her lead and walk through the entire vertical axis of the date seed-shaped celestial phenomenon. After walking through the entire celestial phenomenon, the trace of resentment in the zombie instincts would disappear completely in the shock waves of the celestial phenomenon. He didn't know which senior zombie had come up with this method, but it was indeed simple, safe, and effective. It wouldn't miss a single zombie, which was much more efficient than the early stage of the Zombie King's path. It was a genius invention. Ali led the 50 old zombies to walk around the tip of the date seed in order to eliminate their instinctive fear of the celestial phenomenon. During this process, she would constantly whistle to calm them down. This was a slow process that required enough patience and meticulousness until every old zombie was completely obedient. This round took more than 10 days. This was the initial stage of walking zombies. The key was to be extremely careful and meticulous. Ali didn't lack these qualities. Finally, the 50 old zombies quieted down. After all, they had been tamed, so they were much easier to lead than wild zombies. She had once tamed a wild zombie with her senior sister, but that was really difficult. It was like a wild donkey that had just been caught from deep in the mountains. It didn't listen to any instructions at all. After finishing the preparations, she began to walk zombies. In fact, she led the group of zombies to the center of the date seed. Because this process had already become habitual, the old zombies would basically follow her directions. As long as her zombie whistle was still there, the old zombies would firmly follow the direction of the zombie whistle. The most dangerous part of this process was that when they got close to the center of the date seed crown, the human guide would leave for a period of time. It was a deliberate departure, because for Yuaniing like her, she couldn't withstand the vibrations at the center of the date seed crown. Even a monarch of the Wang Jiangdao wouldn't be able to withstand the vibrations and would become an idiot. The zombies, on the other hand, weren't afraid because they didn't have brains to begin with, so they wouldn't become idiots either. When there was still some distance to the center, before the cultivator's limit, the cultivator would stop the zombie whistle and let the zombies fly forward according to the inertia. Meanwhile, the cultivator would quickly leave the sky and fly to the other side of the date seed crown. There, the cultivator would blow the zombie whistle again, thus guiding the group of zombies to successfully complete the zombie walk. The key point was that the group of zombies' inertia would take longer than the cultivator's time to go from one side to the other. More than 1,000 years ago, this kind of zombie walk required the cooperation of two human cultivators. One would lead from one side, and the other would take over from the other side. However, with the accumulation of experience and the improvement of tools, slowly, one person could complete this task alone. It could be considered a kind of progress. Right now, there was a shortage of manpower in the Jiangdao realm. Many senior brothers and sisters went outside to gather information. Completing the zombie walk alone was a test for Ali. It was also a sign that a cultivator of the Jiangdao realm had matured. It was a hurdle that must be passed. In fact, Ali had already completed this task once. Under the gaze of her senior sister, she was confident and wasn't worried. With great familiarity, the group of zombies was led to a place near the center of the date seed crown. The force of the vibrations here began to increase exponentially, almost reaching Ali's limit. She also didn't want to take any unnecessary risks. This was the first time she completed the zombie walk alone, so she still had to start from the safe side. After blowing the zombie whistle one last time at the group of zombies, she immediately left. Enduring the discomfort of the strong vibrations, she rushed out of the sky at full speed. This place really wasn't a place for humans to stay. Only the brainless cultivators with abnormal bodies like zombies could enter and leave as they pleased. Lu Xiaoyi sat cross-legged at the very center of the turbulent shockwave. He was a bit regretful for his rashness. He underestimated the power of the sky too much. Therefore, after familiarizing himself with it for a few years, he went deeper and deeper until he finally arrived at the very center of the sky. Based on his judgment at that time, there wasn't anything wrong with his actions. He could also handle the situation at the center of the sky with ease. However, as he wasn't used to going deep into the sky, he neglected the most important thing. When the sky changed, the gravitational and repulsive forces actually had the characteristics of tides in many cases. It was sometimes strong and sometimes weak. This period could be as short as a few months or as long as a few decades. The cycle wasn't fixed. When he came in, it was still in the cycle of the weak gravitational force. But what was worse was that after he stayed in the center for a few months, the cycle ended and suddenly became strong. During the strong cycle, the power of the turbulent force field suddenly increased by several times, instantly exceeding the safety margin that he had set for himself. Now, he had been trapped here for several years. The situation was getting worse and worse because the force field was still slowly increasing. Chapter 1459. Moving in the turbulent force field required the support of magic power. In such a special place, using magic power and spirit to resist the shock waves was no different from seeking death. The smart way was to understand the changes in the Tao state here and integrate oneself into it. Lu Xiaoyi did exactly that. That was why he could endure the shock waves that others could not endure and still have the strength to move slowly. However, all of this was under the sudden increase in the strength of the force field. All of his escape routes were gone. There was only one reason. He underestimated the omnipresent celestial phenomena in the universe. These celestial phenomena had buried more cultivators than those who died in battle over millions of years, especially those that looked peaceful and peaceful. In fact, there was danger hidden within. By the time he realized it, there was already nowhere to run. He had also devised countless escape plans for himself, but none of them worked. The problem he was facing now was, should he risk his life to escape with serious injuries? Or should he persevere and wait for the arrival of the week cycle? The former still had more than half of the chances of dying here. The latter was still far away in the future. But now he saw a third possibility. A group of zombies jumped over, moving together in a uniform manner. The group of zombies formed a line and flew vertically at a moderate speed. Lu Xiaoyi tried his best to align himself with their group. This was the only thing he could do to bring himself out through them. There were still many things that he did not understand. For example, would these guys attack him when they saw him? Would he be able to keep up with them? Or should he just catch one? The first stage was daunting, but not dangerous. These guys treated him like he was nothing. They passed by in a single file and ignored him. This was good news, but he still could not be sure that if he attacked one of them, the other zombies would still ignore him. This was a group. He did not have the ability to move continuously. The best way was to hang on to one of the zombies. The most suitable way was to be the last one. This was a little disgusting, but the situation was urgent. His life was more important. Now was not the time to care about these small details. When the 49 zombies in front of him had passed by one, and there was only one left, Lu Xiaoyi reached out his hand and grabbed the belt of the closest zombie. Even though it was such a small zombie, and he had spent a long time preparing for this action, it had almost caused him to be injured in the force field. Fortunately, he had finally caught it. The zombies were obviously a little resistant, but after being tamed by the cultivators of the Zombie King Dao for many years, they didn't dare to make a move against human beings. That would be severely punished. If they wanted to make a move, they had to get the command of the zombie sentries. This was why the zombies had no choice but to endure. Even so, the last zombie's instincts made it extremely resistant to human contact, because in its subconscious, normal humans were extremely dirty things. It was just like how humans looked at them. The zombies continued to leap forward, and in this process, the final zombie was locked in a battle between its instinctive disgust and the zombie whistle's control. When its instincts overcame its fear of the zombie whistle, it would turn around and tear this filthy thing in half. Lu Xiaoyi had the time to observe the zombies up close. This was not his first encounter with zombies, but it was clear that the zombies here were very different from the ones he remembered. No fangs. It was not incomplete. He didn't even stick out his tongue. It didn't look ferocious. He was just an ordinary human. Other than his eyes being a little dull, there wasn't anything special about him. That's right, his knees could bend. Even his clothes were clean. His hair couldn't be said to be not messy, but it wasn't dirty as if it hadn't been washed for a long time. Every zombie wore different clothes, but he didn't know if it was their preference, or was it the aesthetics of the controller. He could feel the zombie's resistance, but he wouldn't let go just because of its resistance. He would never let go of something that only relied on its instincts and didn't have its own intelligence. The group of zombies continued to move forward. With the last little tail, they began to gradually leave the center of the turbulence. The pressure on Lu Xiaoyi's body also began to lessen. In this place, the zombies without intelligence were actually more resistant than him. This made him, a monarch, very speechless. Human cultivators were not omnipotent. This was the truth that he understood in this thrilling experience. However, it was a blessing in disguise. It was precisely because of the bitter struggle in the center of the turbulence all these years that he had gained a deeper understanding of some of the fundamental principles of the five ties. It was just that this kind of method was really somewhat unacceptable to him. He still didn't have a deep understanding of the unpredictability of astronomical phenomena. During the flight, because they didn't receive the zombie whistle's guidance for a long time, the group of zombies began to show signs of loosening. The appearance was that the formation began to twist and turn, not very orderly, especially the last zombie. Suddenly, the last zombie's eyes flashed fiercely. After being free from a zombie whistle's control for a long time, it was finally controlled by its instincts. It turned its head, flicked its finger blades, and was about to hug back. Lu Xiaoyi wouldn't be polite. He didn't know any way to control zombies. He activated the sword chi in both hands and rushed into the zombie's body, tearing the tough body into pieces. Although there was no guidance, he was now out of the most dangerous area. He could control his body to fly forward without the zombie belt, although his speed was still not good enough. As he got farther and farther away from the center, his ability was quickly recovering. Finally, he got through this hurdle. It was scary, but not dangerous. It was also at this moment that the zombie whistle came from the front. That was Ali, who had arrived at the location. He immediately blew the whistle to calm the group of zombies that had begun to become violent and loose. Under the effect of the zombie whistle, the group of zombies returned to order. Of course, there was one person who couldn't hear the zombie whistle, but he followed behind obediently and didn't stand out from the crowd. Now that he had regained control of his body, he also knew that this group of zombies was controlled by someone. No matter what, they had done him a big favor, so he should go over and thank them. Following the group of zombies was the best way to find this human, just casually apologizing for killing one of his master zombies. Seeing that these things came in groups, it shouldn't be too precious. But before that, he needed to determine the origin of these zombies. From his contact with them just now, these things were very strange. He still couldn't accurately determine if it was man-made or due to some other reason. There were still a few orthodoxies that controlled zombies in the universe. Basically, they were not considered to be evil. They were all made from dead Taoist corpses. Very few dared to brazenly use living people to make zombies. This method might not be able to make the most powerful zombies, but would definitely attract the attention of various orthodoxies. He was a cautious person. He just needed to follow and take a look. He didn't mind temporarily turning into a zombie. This was a novel feeling. For someone like him who liked to play pranks, this could satisfy part of his curiosity. If everything was normal, he would just treat it as a friendly joke. Chapter 1460. Ali was very anxious because he had just received a message from the sect that a swarm of insects was flying towards the king zombie world. The sect requested him to immediately bring the zombies back to the king zombie world to participate in the battle. Therefore, the zombie whistle sounded especially urgent. The zombies could understand and increase their speed. Although Lu Xiaoyi couldn't understand, he at least knew that he had to keep up with the group. As he got further and further away from the center of the turbulent flow, he had basically returned to normal. His worries were gone, and his playful heart was raised. Pretending to be a zombie wasn't difficult for him. He only needed to pay attention to make his eyes glazed over and control his eyeballs to move as little as possible. When looking at people, he had to first turn his neck and not move his eyeballs. The way he flew was very easy. For a swordsman who was good at escaping, there wasn't any special flying skill that he couldn't learn. Then he had to restrain his aura and lower his body temperature until it was the same as the temperature of the universe. If the master didn't know every single one of his zombies like the back of his hand, even a Yuaning wouldn't be able to discover anything. You might remember the voice, smile, and clothes of your friends, but would you care about the differences between the dozens of zombies in the spirit beast bag? Of course, he might be able to hide from the master, but he couldn't hide from his zombie companions. But they didn't seem to have the intelligence to tell on him. After flying for some distance, they finally saw a very exotic beauty. She was barefoot, wearing a tube skirt and a sleeveless shirt. Her skin was white and her figure was plump. She was very exotic. At first glance, Lu Xiaoyi felt that she shouldn't be a person who could make zombies. Of course, this kind of judgment was a bit arbitrary, but what did it matter? Beautiful things always made people daydream. Ali obviously didn't have time to pay attention to the changes in his zombies. As long as the numbers were correct, what changes could there be? In the king zombie world, there were hundreds of zombies like this, and they didn't belong to anyone. How could she pay attention to the appearance of each zombie? It wasn't like she was in love with a zombie. If the numbers were correct, this zombie movement was very successful. Ali took the lead and led the zombies to fly out. As a matter of fact, she should have led the zombies to the end of the torrent. Only then would she be able to eliminate the zombies' malice. Otherwise, if the malice was not completely eliminated, the next zombie's malice would be brought forward. However, if the domain was in danger, everything could be simplified. Even if the domain was protected, it was just finding time to make another trip. What trouble would there be? This was practically the maximum speed of the zombie horde. Zombies were never known for their speed. Their specialty lay in their tough skin, thick flesh, and boundless strength. He was immune to spells and could not sense anything mysterious. When encountering them, other than fighting them head-on, there was almost no other good way. Therefore, this thing was very effective against Dharma cultivators. It was comparable to physique cultivators, but it was nothing more than a target for swordsmen. No matter how hard one's body was, could it withstand the sharpness of a flying sword? Of course, this thing had no obvious weakness. It was useless to stab their heads because their brains were pitifully small. It was also useless to attack their internal organs because their internal organs had already mutated into solid bodies. While flying, Ali, who had a lot on her mind, received another order from the sect. It said that the insect horde had reached a critical point and the battle outside had already begun. She was to quickly provide support. However, she had to be careful. There were probably still small insects wandering around, so she had to be on the lookout for possible attacks. In this month, many things had happened in the domain. It was all caused by the monks. According to the cultivators who occasionally came from other domains, there seemed to be a large group of monks exterminating insects in the nearby domains. Exterminating insects was fine, but not all of them were exterminated. If the insect horde was scattered and crippled, then everything would be fine. However, they didn't care about the small insects that escaped and crazily retaliated against the human world and the surrounding small domains. Several universes away from the king zombie world, there was a large insect horde that suffered a calamity. In the end, the insect horde was scattered, each fleeing for their lives. The monks only cared about taking care of the large insects, but they didn't care about the small insects that weren't high in cultivation. When they scattered, there would always be some that escaped. In the end, these insects would be destroyed in the battle with the human cultivators again and again. This was a fact, but before they were destroyed, they could still harm one or several places. To a large power like the monk group, this kind of insect horde was not worth mentioning in terms of quality or quantity. However, to a small domain like the king zombie world, it was very fatal. Hundreds to thousands of insects. This was indeed a small insect horde. The strongest insects were spirit, primordial spirit realm. Their strength was indeed not high. However, to the king zombie world, the pressure was already very great. Every bit of fighting strength was precious, so she had to rush back before the battle ended. A long line of zombies was led back by the anxious Ali. She also couldn't be careful of the insect horde that might ambush her. If she was careful, then she wouldn't be able to travel properly. She could only go wherever she encountered them. Everything would be decided by the heavenly Tao. With this kind of speed, they quickly flew for half a month. They weren't too far away from the king zombie world, only 7 to 8 days' time. However, at this time, the group of zombies started to act up again. For some reason, as they ran, they suddenly lost their formation. It was as if the last zombie ran excitedly and bumped into the one in front. Like a domino, one head bumped into the other, causing the entire formation to be messed up. This kind of situation couldn't continue. If they didn't care, the group of zombies would only run more and more chaotically. In the end, the group would scatter and scatter. It wasn't certain if they could gather all of them. They needed to stop and reorganize the formation. She fiercely glared at the last zombie. She couldn't blame it. It didn't understand either. In a group of zombies, this kind of abnormality would happen from time to time. Usually, after experiencing a meteorological phenomenon, it would be accompanied by the awakening of a powerful zombie skill. In the end, it would become a rare king zombie. It was a good thing, but it happened now. It was very untimely. She quickly stopped. In the midst of the corpse whistle's transformation, she gathered the zombies back into one place and arranged them one by one. She glanced at the last zombie. This guy's speed was very fast, and its strength wasn't small either. To be able to knock over a group of zombies, it wasn't something an ordinary zombie could do. Didn't it know how to run? Thus, She blew the corpse whistle and issued a simple order, ordering this zombie that might mutate in the meteorological phenomenon to be the vanguard. That zombie stood there with a wooden stick, but it didn't move at all. Its dead fish eyes rolled up, as if it didn't hear anything. Only understood. This really was a sign that some kind of ability had awakened. This kind of thing often happened in the history of the sect's zombie taming. After awakening an ability, they would forget some things. For example, the human's control over them. This wouldn't last long. If the human cultivator couldn't seize this opportunity to quickly tame it, it would run away and become a wild zombie again. Where would they find it in the vast universe? Chapter 1461. Although she had a plan in her mind, Ali didn't have any special methods to deal with it. This kind of situation was usually done by the experienced monarch elders. For a newcomer like her who had been in the nascent soul realm for less than 100 years, she had never had the chance to come into contact with such an example. Although she didn't have any practical experience or practical methods, it didn't mean that Ali wouldn't make a final effort. After all, the strength of a zombie king far exceeded that of a normal human nascent soul stage cultivator. Some of the stronger ones even had abilities similar to that of a human perfected cultivator. Now that a great war was about to break out, they couldn't just give up on a precious zombie king. There were only 4 king zombies that had been tamed in the sect. If she brought this one back, not to mention the merit, just the contribution to the sect would be enough to satisfy her. It was also the best return to the sect that had trained her. She couldn't give it up easily. In communicating with zombies, the King Zombie faction had a set of special methods. For example, ordinary wild zombies were one method, old zombies were another method, and king zombies were another method. Among them, wild zombies and old zombies were very resistant to contact with humans, but king zombies were slightly different. Because of the mutation, there would be a slight change in intelligence. Some of them would hate humans more, while the other part would subconsciously get close to humans. For the former, she couldn't do anything. She could only rely on the mysterious zombie controlling technique of the sect's elders to forcibly tame it, but it couldn't increase the success rate. For the latter, she could do it now. She only needed to softly sing, no matter if it was a song or words of concern, to see if it could evoke the past memories of this king zombie. Although it would never be able to return to the past, as long as it could instinctively feel a trace of intimacy, there would be a chance. Therefore, she stopped whistling and slowly approached this young king zombie. It was a little handsome, but she didn't know why it had fallen to the point of being a zombie. Carefully observing the reaction of this king zombie, it was still deadpan. But for Ali, no reaction was the best reaction. She slowly stretched out her hand and softly sang, "My soul returns. Where can I leave? Stop the war. Give me back my broken body. My soul returns. Where can I be free? Let my lonely soul return to my hometown as a sacrifice. Let my soul return." In Ali's imagination, if this guy could feel something, his expression would definitely become gentle, revealing a thoughtful expression. That was the deepest longing for his past, something that would never be erased. Even if he became a zombie, it would still be integrated into his bones and blood, his instincts. That was what the sect said when they tamed the zombie king. It was the key to success or failure. There were good signs. There was also bad news. The bad sign was that this newly awakened zombie king didn't seem to be recalling its past at all. His cold and stiff body showed no signs of softening. Did she fail to summon him? The good news was that its eyeballs finally moved. This was a physiological reaction that only king zombies could have. The eyes of the other old and wild zombies would never move, because they didn't even have the slightest bit of intelligence. This could only mean that her judgment was completely correct. This was really a king zombie seed that had just awakened, and it had undergone some kind of mutation due to the impact of the shockwave in the sky. The probability was 1 in 100. The new Wang Jiang did not look directly into her eyes. This was also somewhat different from the sex records. It seemed that the other 4 zombies in the sect all looked blankly at the summoner during the process of taming. The one she was facing right now was very strange. It didn't look at each other, but naturally drooped down. Based on a woman's intuition, was this from her bare waist to her 2 smooth, snow-white, round, and straight thighs? Ali immediately threw this ridiculous thought out of her mind. It was just a zombie. How could it be the same as those lechers? It must be a coincidence. It must be. At least, it didn't resist her. Ali clenched her teeth. Time was tight. There wasn't much time for her to delay and think. She could only take a little risk and see if she could tame it in the shortest time possible, turning it into a fighting force. Taking another step forward, the 2 sides entered a safe distance and gently stroked the zombie's cheeks with both hands. This was very dangerous. It was explicitly forbidden in the sect's rules for taming zombies. Because at such a close distance, as long as the zombie was frightened, the opposite cultivator would immediately have his intestines pierced. But Ali also had no other choice. In order to help the sect, she was willing to take a strange risk. At least she knew that she couldn't grab the zombie's hands, because that was the zombie's most powerful weapon. Once you grabbed it, it would immediately make the zombie instinctively resist. This step, she was a little rash, but she had no other choice. She won the bet. The zombie didn't resist her touch at all. Instead, it seemed to enjoy it very much. This made Ali's confidence increase greatly. Success. So her voice became even softer. Come with me. Don't resist, I won't hurt you. After saying that, she withdrew her hands and turned around. According to her understanding of taming a zombie king, this new zombie king should go with her. But after taking a few steps, she gloomily found that the zombie king didn't show any signs of following her. What was going on? She didn't have time to play riddles with it right now. Then, under her astonished gaze, the new zombie king made a new move. Its body stiffly bent down, and its hands crossed over its shoulders. This action in the human world was a standard sign language gesture, just like people waving their hands to bid farewell, nodding their head to agree, shaking their legs to leisurely. This action in the human world meant, I'll carry you. This was too inconceivable, right? Was she very familiar with this zombie king? But Ali's nature was kind. She never thought of problems from the bad side. A zombie, moreover a newly awakened one, what kind of bad thoughts could it have? Probably her voice reminded it of its lover when it was alive. Was it this happy playful in the past? Carefree time? Yes, it must be like this. So it asked to carry her, just like carrying that trace of softness in the depths of its memory. This kind of request, she couldn't refuse, because in the Zombie King boundary, the boundaries between men and women weren't as rigid and dogmatic as some main world's boundaries. Because she didn't have time to change this Zombie King's thoughts. She also didn't know how to change it. She was very clear to a zombie to express goodwill, especially the first request, you must not refuse. As long as you refuse, there won't be a future. You won't be able to tame it again. This was the stubborn nature of zombies. It was nothing more than carrying her and flying. It wasn't much. Just treat it as riding a demonic beast. Would you care about wearing a skirt while riding a demonic beast, your skin touching? She was still too kind, always finding reasons to explain for it. In fact, the simplest way of thinking was, even if it was a zombie, it was also a perverted zombie, a perverted zombie. It was a zombie king that was even more perverted than the one on top. She was the only one who was deceived among all the living beings present. She didn't see it as clearly as those 49 real zombies. In the eyes of the zombies, this was simply two human adulterers flirting. Chapter 1462. Ollie didn't hesitate anymore. She was in a hurry. Therefore, with a light jump, she was already on top of the zombie king's head. Before she could sit down, she felt a pair of ice-cold big hands wrapped around her bare thighs and pressed down. Because it used too much force, her hands sank half a finger deep into her thighs. Now, she could finally sit down. Now that things had come to this, she could only put up with it. She just didn't know what would happen in the real battle. This zombie king should put her down, right? She calmed her mind and didn't think too much. She only ordered softly, "Let's go." This time, the zombie king that was carrying the beauty finally had some motivation and started to move. This made Ali's heart finally relax. At least, this strong fighting force was stable. Her risk was not in vain. She blew the zombie whistle and was about to set off again with the zombie king in the lead. However, she didn't expect that the zombie king's flight path wasn't a straight line, but a big circle. The direct result was that the 50 zombies flew into a big circle and didn't move from their original place. Another demon moth. Ali even had the thought of killing this strange thing. She couldn't understand. Why was it that after encountering this zombie king, everything seemed to go wrong? Everything seemed to go wrong. And she couldn't get down. Her strength was only at the level of an ordinary human newly advanced yuaning. How could she get down when she was tightly held by this zombie king? Just as she was thinking of a way to blow the zombie whistle, she suddenly felt something was wrong. There was an unknown fluctuation of spiritual vigor in the distance, and it was rapidly flying towards here. Although she didn't have enough experience, she wasn't stupid. She immediately understood why the zombie king under her legs was flying in circles and didn't want to move forward. It must have realized the danger, so it didn't want to form a single formation that was easy to attack. Instead, it formed a circle that was the easiest to defend. This was actually a zombie king that knew battle tactics. She didn't have time to think. She just entered yuaning not long ago. Her divine sense was very limited. After feeling the fluctuation of aura for a few breaths, she saw dozens of aggressive insects rushing towards her. They were basically yuaning-level insect, but the one in the lead had a strong aura. It made her heart sink. Oh no, it was a monarch-level insect. In terms of quantity, the zombies weren't far behind. However, in terms of quality, because a monarch-level insect might change the whole battlefield, she was a little nervous. This was the first time she had fought another creature in the void of space, and it was the infamous Zerg. What should he do? Attack or defense? What formation should he choose? She had no experience with these things, so her mind was blank. She couldn't be blamed for this. No matter who it was, this was the first time in their life that they had encountered such a wild attacker. That ferocious appearance was filled with killing intent. Anyone would panic. She was so flustered that she forgot that there was a king zombie beneath her that could fight against a monarch-level insect. She might have forgotten, but Wang Jiang wouldn't. His body leaped forward, and he charged straight at the true monarch bug. Ali finally reacted. Wang Jiang had already made the choice for her. At this moment, she had no other choice but to blow the whistle with all her might. The remaining 49 old zombies finally had a chance to escape. In their eyes, they wouldn't be afraid of the enemy's ferociousness. The other party was an insect and they were inanimate. Who should be afraid of whom? Thus, each of them picked a target and charged forward together. Ali whistled as he urgently ordered, "Put me down. Put me down. If you crash into it like this, both of us will die." She spoke as if the one below her wasn't a zombie that couldn't understand human language, but a human companion. But a zombie was a zombie. It didn't listen to Ali's command at all. Instead, it charged even faster, so fast that Ali didn't dare to imagine that a zombie could have such speed. Could be a speed-type king zombie, but if you were holding your thighs with both hands, what would you use to attack? For zombies, their sharpest weapons were their hands, the blades on their hands, and the corpse poison that would spread when hit. It was as if they were sitting on a thin, floating raft that was about to crash into a planet. The huge insect in front of them was more than 10 times bigger than the two of them combined. When it opened its mouth, the sharp teeth in its mouth were densely packed. They were charging towards the mouth, walking right into the trap. Ali was so anxious that she was about to go crazy. She had also thought about her future in the void of space. If she encountered a strong enemy, she would fight to the death and die for her cause. But she had never thought that there would be such an awkward day. She was so passive, and she was helplessly digging her own grave. This damn zombie. If she had known it would be like this, she wouldn't have subdued it. At least she would have had a chance to fight it. But now, she couldn't even fly to where she wanted to go. She didn't know where she was at all. In the rapid collision between the two sides, in her annoyance, in her panic, and when she was caught off guard, she didn't even have time to use her most prized technique. The stinky smell of the huge insect's mouth seemed to blow on her nose, and it was close at hand. She only felt that the speed of the king zombie, which was already very fast, suddenly increased by another level. Fortunately, her waist was good. Otherwise, this sudden acceleration would have broken her small waist. But this sudden acceleration allowed the two of them to successfully avoid the huge pair of claws that the huge insect had swung out in front of its mouth. They dodged it by a hair's breadth. Then Elise saw that the king zombie under her had already kicked the huge insect with one of its big feet. The insect, which was as big as a small mountain, was kicked until its head was bleeding, and its bones were broken. The huge insect rolled back, but the king zombie under it didn't give up. After the left foot kicked, it would switch to the right foot, and after the right foot kicked, it would switch to the left foot. After a series of kicks, the huge insect had already been kicked into a bloody mess. Ali's heart was like a roller coaster, going up and down, from panic to ecstasy. This time, she had picked up a treasure. Could it be that this was a king zombie that had awakened a leg technique? When these two legs kicked, it was really fierce and unparalleled, and those who blocked it were swept away. A true monarch insect under its feet was actually kicked to death without being able to fight back. Stop kicking, it's already dead. Let's change to the next one. This time, the king zombie under her was finally obedient. It carried Ali and floated in the battlefield, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. When that pair of shadowless chain kicks kicked, it was as if it had 3 legs. Ali also completely gave up the idea of using her technique because she couldn't use it at all. She couldn't aim at the insect. When the king zombie under her started running, she didn't know where it would fly to the next moment. But one thing was for sure, wherever it flew to, it would definitely kick to pieces. In less than 100 breaths, half of the insects had already been kicked to pieces. It was really bloody to the extreme. The zombie horde recovered. In terms of individual strength, they were still slightly above normal insects. And with this king zombie running unhindered, the battle ended in less than a moment. Other than the 3 old zombies who were torn apart by the insect horde, none of the other insects were lucky enough to survive. They all died in this battle. Although the zombie horde didn't recognize this person as a fellow zombie, they recognized his strength. Instinctively, they stayed far away from this so-called king zombie. Ali was in high spirits and blew the zombie whistle. Let's go. Let's kill the insect horde. She had never been as confident as she was now, because the king zombie under her was terrifyingly strong. Perhaps this was the legendary rare zombie among zombies. An emperor zombie? Whether it was an emperor zombie or not, she didn't know, but it was definitely a yellow zombie. Chapter 1463. Ali was not in a hurry to get down, because there was no place safer than riding on the neck of the zombie king. And she couldn't get down. This zombie king was good at everything. It was strong, had high ability, had outstanding footwork, and had a keen battle awareness. Its control of the battlefield was something that Ali couldn't compare to. The only thing that made her a little embarrassed was that when it was moving and kicking, its hands were not fixed at a fixed position on its legs, but subconsciously moved up and down with the movement of its legs. This seemed to be reasonable. The human body was a coordinated organism. The muscles and bones of the whole body were interconnected. Even if it farted, it would trigger a large number of muscle groups. For example, the intestines would move, the calves would tighten, the thighs would exert strength, the buttocks would contract, and the muscles would contract and release. Only then could it release a loud and clear fart. So when it was kicking the bug, it was understandable that its hands would subconsciously slip. It just made her a little embarrassed. Even if the king zombie world was more open, it didn't seem to be open to this extent. Of course, considering that pair of cold big hands and its zombie nature, she definitely didn't have any thoughts. There were only layers of goosebumps. The battle was too intense and too exciting. Under the madness, these little things were just minor details, not worth mentioning. Under Ali's command, the group of zombies quickly swept through the void. The speed was just right, just enough to display the fastest speed of the zombies. The Zombie King also didn't show the crazy speed it had when it was fighting. It seemed to be very restrained, very understanding of the big picture. She had to admit, in terms of fighting, this Zombie King was impeccable. It just had some small problems in its habits. That was another matter. There's no need to take it seriously. She wasn't completely unguarded. It wasn't that she doubted whether this thing was human or not, but she was very curious how this thing could have this kind of ability. It seemed to be different from the 4 zombie kings in the sect. After the battle, she had secretly sent out a strand of magic power to test it, but the magic power was like a clay ox entering the sea. There was no reaction at all. This was the same reaction as the other zombies. She was afraid of provoking this zombie king, so she didn't dare to test it too much. She also had a trace of curiosity in her heart. It was very obvious that this zombie king must have been a good fighter when it was alive. It might have reached a high level, otherwise it wouldn't have this kind of instinctive fighting instinct. It was really pitiful at such a young age. It had now become a zombie, being ordered around by others. Ali's biggest problem was that she always liked to talk to herself, find excuses for herself, beautifying a yellow zombie into an emperor zombie king. But this kind of character, if it was a zombie cultivator, they might not be able to control it. When she got used to sitting on the zombie king's shoulder, she gradually didn't mind it. She valued cleanliness the most. This zombie king was very clean, its hair was smooth, and there was no dandruff on its collar, so she didn't mind it too much. It was just that its hands were a little tight, and the position it was riding on was a little bit too close. These were all small, not to the big matters. She secretly reminded herself not to nitpick. If the King Zombie world could safely survive this war, she would ask the sect to personally train this unusual fellow and see if she could dig out some interesting things from its residual consciousness. A few days later, there was an intense fluctuation of spiritual vigor in front of them. The screams of the insects and the growls of the zombies. This made Ali realize that they had arrived at the battlefield. In a universe's cultivation wars, most of the cultivators and forces had no experience, especially Zerg. This was a completely different concept from the wars between humans. All the cultivation world's default rules of war did not apply to the insects. There was no law to rely on. So in most cases, it was inevitable to fight like a pot of porridge. In fact, even for the orthodoxies with the most battle experience, in the end, the battle would be a mess, including the sword vein in Buddhism. But some of the chaos was man-made and purposeful. The insects were in chaos, but the humans were not. This was the knowledge of war, and it was also the quality cultivated by countless battles. It was impossible to expect a place like the Zombie King to reach this level. It was already very impressive to dare to fight in the field. The Zombie King had this kind of courage to a large extent because they had a large number of zombies, hundreds of old zombies, and 4 Zombie Kings as the main force. Together with a few human cultivators, a small realm could fight like a medium-sized realm. From this point of view, the ancestors of the Zombie King, when they used zombies as the breakthrough point of the orthodoxy, were indeed very prescient. Numbers were king, especially when it came to insect swarms. Of course, Ali was no exception. She was a rookie among rookies at this point. She had no strategy to speak of. In fact, when it came to zombies, which only had instincts and no intelligence, the so-called strategy was meaningless. They couldn't understand. They just had to rush up and fight. This was also what Ali was doing. With a loud zombie whistle, dozens of old zombies rushed to the battlefield and joined the chaotic battle. But Ali was not in a hurry to fight, because at least she understood one thing. The Zombie King should be used in the most critical place. What was the most critical place? She didn't know. So she had to find her master first. Huan Pei Supreme was in a corner of the battlefield. The joint force of the human Supreme had already been disrupted by the insect swarm, and she was besieged by two Supreme insects. She was surrounded by danger. Her hairpin was crooked, her hair was messy, her clothes were torn, and her skirt was turned into a grass skirt. It was not that the insects had any special thoughts, but if you didn't have a strong body, you would inevitably be in this kind of predicament. The fighting capacity of the Wong zombie orthodoxy was indeed very weak. It was located in a corner and couldn't keep up with the mainstream development of the universe's self-cultivation world. Otherwise, they wouldn't put the hope of fighting on the zombies. They were already very weak, and if they were distracted to raise the zombies, they would be in a very awkward situation when they really met the enemy. For two god insects like this, a normal Taoist Dharma practitioner could easily fight one or two, and an excellent swordsman could also fight 5 or 6 insects. For example, Swordvane, who moved quickly, it was not uncommon for a swordsman to drag a dozen big insects. But when it came to Huan Pei, she was immediately overwhelmed by the 2 insects. She was seriously injured. She was already seriously injured. Although it was not obvious on the surface, there was some imbalance in her nervous system. This was caused by the sharp feelers of the insects that had pierced into her spine. Externally, she could not control some of her bodily functions. For example, when she was anxious, she would cry, and saliva would flow unconsciously. This should not be the behavior of a true monarch. However, time was of the essence, and danger was at any time, anywhere. She did not have the chance to heal her injured nerves. She could only hope to hold on for as long as possible, because only by holding on for a longer time, the hundreds of old zombies under her command would fight a bloody battle without retreating. Otherwise, as long as she died, these zombies would not be able to fight for long. For zombies, they only followed their instincts and didn't care about the boundary. What did it have to do with them? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.